Whispers in the Dark. A murder mystery story. James Cooper isn't a detective by choice. He's a criminologist and lecturer drawn into the hunt when a string of ritualistic killings mirrors the very cases he lectures on. As the body count rises, whispers spread of something more than human in the killer's methods. James has to untangle whether he's hunting a genius psychopath or something darker. This is a Moon Dragon original production. All rights are reserved. Prologue. The apartment was silent, too silent. Margaret Lee set her wineglass on the coffee table, trying to ignore the emptiness pressing against the walls. She hated nights like this, when the city outside seemed to stop breathing. She locked the door twice, checked the windows, then laughed nervously at herself. "You're being ridiculous, Maggie. Just another lonely Thursday night." The laugh died when she heard it. At first, it was so faint she thought she'd imagined it. A hiss, a scrape, something brushing the air. She tilted her head, listening. Nothing, just the refrigerator's hum, the tick of the wall clock. Then it came again, a whisper. It didn't sound like words, not exactly. More like breath coiling into syllables that refused to form. A low rasp that slid under her skin, cold as ice water. Her chest tightened. She turned on the TV, desperate for noise, for distraction, but the whispering rose above the chatter of anchors and commercials. Clearer, closer. Margaret grabbed her phone and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. "Emergency services," the operator said. "What's your emergency?" Margaret swallowed. Her throat felt raw, as though the whisper was scraping it from the inside. "Someone's here. I can hear them whispering." "Stay on the line, ma'am. What's your address?" Margaret gave it in a rush, voice cracking. She backed toward the kitchen, clutching the phone to her ear. The whisper followed, slithering closer, curling into her name. "Maya Garrett." The operator's voice was steady. "Help is on the way. Stay calm. Stay on the phone with me." But the phone slipped from her fingers, clattering to the tiles. Because the whisper was no longer behind the door. It was right behind her. She spun around. Nothing, just shadows pooling in the corners. Her scream never made it past her lips. When the police arrived 20 minutes later, they found the door still locked, the windows sealed, no signs of forced entry. The only sounds were the operator's voice still faintly crackling from the phone on the floor. "Ma'am, are you there?" Margaret Lee lay dead in the center of the room, her eyes wide, mouth frozen in terror. And carved into the wall, deep and deliberate, were words that chilled every officer to the bone. James Cooper knows the truth. Chapter 1, The Lecturer. James Cooper had a voice built for lecture halls. Calm, deliberate, every word carrying the weight of certainty. His students said he could make even dry case studies sound like ghost stories. That morning, the criminology department was packed, students spilling into the aisles. Cooper stood at the podium in his rumpled blazer, sleeves rolled to his elbows, glasses sliding down his nose. On the screen behind him, a grainy photo of an old crime scene flickered. "The most dangerous killers," Cooper said, "aren't the ones who draw attention. They're the ones who could sit next to you on a bus, buy milk at the same store, and you'd never remember their face." A murmur rippled through the students. They loved when he did this, when he slipped into performance. They adapt. They study us as much as we study them. They whisper their way into our lives until, before you realize it, they've written the final chapter of yours. He paused. That was his gift, silence heavy enough to make the room lean forward. "Now," Cooper said, "who can tell me why anonymity is the ultimate weapon?" Hands shot up. He scanned the crowd, choosing a nervous sophomore. She fumbled through an answer about invisibility, about blending in. Cooper smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good. You see, monsters don't always hide under beds. Most often, they hide in plain sight." He clicked the slide. A new photo appeared, crime scene tape, chalk outline. And for a split second, he froze. The outline on the screen was a mirror image of a case he'd worked with police 5 years earlier, a case that had left scars he never spoke about. His chest tightened, memories clawing at the edge of his mind. He forced himself to keep talking, but his hand shook on the clicker. The class ended. Students filed out, buzzing with chatter about how creepy Professor Cooper's lectures always were. When the room emptied, James sat alone at his desk, staring at the outline on the screen. His reflection stared back at him in the black monitor when he shut it off. He rubbed his temples. He was tired. He hadn't slept more than 4 hours in weeks, ever since. The knock on his door snapped him back. It was Detective Laura Hayes. Tall, sharp-eyed, a friend from the precinct days when Cooper still consulted on cases. "James," she said softly, "we need to talk." He studied her face, instantly recognizing the look in her eyes. He'd seen it too many times. "It's happened again, hasn't it?" he asked. Laura hesitated, then nodded. And just like that, the whispers from his past came rushing back. Chapter 2, The Apartment. James Cooper had walked through enough crime scenes in his life to know they all smelled the same, like something heavy had been burned into the air. Fear had its own scent. He was convinced of it. Detective Laura Hayes led him up the narrow staircase, her voice low. She was alone, 34, schoolteacher. Neighbors didn't hear a thing, door locked from the inside. Cooper adjusted his glasses. Locked room mystery then, classic. "Except it's not a mystery," Laura said grimly. "Not to us." They stopped at the threshold. 2 uniformed officers stepped aside, nodding stiffly. One of them looked relieved to get out of the room. Inside, Margaret Lee's body lay on the living room floor. The coroner hadn't moved her yet. Her eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling, mouth frozen mid-scream. Cooper exhaled slowly. Terror, she died in it. Laura crouched near the wall, shining her flashlight. "That's not the worst part." James followed the beam of light. His stomach clenched. Carved into the plaster, each letter deliberate, was the message. "James Cooper knows the truth." The words seemed to pulse in the dim light, as though they'd been waiting for him. For a long moment, he couldn't breathe. Laura stood, watching him carefully. "You want to explain." Cooper tore his gaze from the wall. "I've never seen this before." "But it mentions you by name." "I don't know why, I swear it." His voice cracked despite himself. Laura folded her arms. "You've lectured on dozens of killers. Maybe one of your students thinks they're being clever." Cooper shook his head. "No, this isn't mimicry. This is personal." He looked back at Margaret Lee, the way her features had twisted in that final moment, the way fear had hollowed her. He imagined the whisper she must have heard before death claimed her. Something cold slid down his spine. "This wasn't about her," Cooper said softly. "This was about me." Laura studied him, lips pressed tight. "Then we have a problem, James, because if this killer knows you, if they're sending you messages." Her voice trailed off. He finished it for her. "Then I'm already in their story." Chapter 3, The Briefing. The precinct's briefing room buzzed like a hornet's nest. Reporters clamored outside, their voices muffled through the glass walls, while detectives argued in low, tense voices. Laura Hayes steered James Cooper to a chair at the long table. He hated being here again, in the thick of flashing badges and suspicious eyes. Once upon a time, he'd been the department's golden consultant, the academic with insights no profiler could match. That was before his burnout, before the case he refused to talk about. Now every pair of eyes seemed to say the same thing. Why is Cooper here? Captain Monroe strode in, grizzled and broad-shouldered, slapping a folder onto the table. The room quieted. "Margaret Lee," he began. "Victim number 1. No signs of forced entry, no DNA, just this." He flicked on the projector. The words carved into the wall glowed on the screen. "James Cooper knows the truth." The room erupted. Is this a threat? Is Cooper involved? Are we dealing with a stalker? Monroe raised a hand. Silence returned. His gaze landed on James. "Professor Cooper, care to explain why a dead woman's apartment has your name written in blood, figuratively speaking?" James adjusted his glasses, feeling the heat of every stare. "I can't explain it. I didn't know Margaret Lee. I've never seen her in my life." Detective Ramirez, a bulldog of a man, leaned forward. Maybe she was one of your students. No. Maybe one of your old cases. James's jaw tightened. I said no. Monroe tapped the folder. Then explain this message. James took a breath, steadying his voice. The message isn't to her. It's to me. Whoever did this, they want me involved. They want me to see it. That carving wasn't for evidence, it was an invitation. The room fell into uneasy silence. Laura broke it. He's right. The killer left no trace except that message. It's not taunting the police, it's targeting him. Ramirez snorted. Great. So we've got a serial killer who's writing love letters to our professor here. James ignored him. His mind was racing, connecting threads. The neat carving, the psychological warfare, the use of whispers. He'd studied killers like this before, predators who didn't just kill, but orchestrated fear like a symphony. This isn't random, he said softly. This killer has a pattern, and they've already chosen me as their audience. Monroe studied him for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. Fine, you're in. Hayes, you'll be his handler. Ramirez, keep the press off our backs. The rest of you lock down every whisper we've heard in the city. I don't care if it's a prank call or a ghost story. Track it. He slammed the folder shut. This isn't just another case. This is theater, and we're sitting in the front row. Outside, a reporter's shout cut through the glass. Professor Cooper, do you have a comment about your connection to the Whisperer? The name hung in the air, chilling every detective in the room. The Whisperer. A killer with no face, no trace. Only a voice in the dark. Chapter 4, The Voice. By the time James stepped out of the precinct, night had swallowed the city. Camera flashes exploded in his face as reporters shouted his name. Professor Cooper, are you the Whisperer's next target? Did you know Margaret Lee? Is the killer your former patient? Laura Hayes shoved past them, shielding him with her arm. No comment, back off. But James knew better than to think this storm would die down. The name Whisperer had already sunk its claws into the media, and his own name was now shackled to it. They reached Laura's car. She tossed him into the passenger seat, slid behind the wheel, and slammed the locks shut. You need to lay low, she said, pulling into traffic. The press are vultures. If they smell fear, they'll circle until you're nothing but bones. James forced a hollow laugh. And what about the killer? What do they smell? She glanced at him. Obsession. The drive was silent after that. James's thoughts churned like a storm. He wanted to deny it, to convince himself this was just coincidence. But deep down, he knew better. Whoever this Whisperer was, they had studied him. When Laura dropped him off at his apartment, she gave a stern look. Door locked, curtains closed. Don't answer the phone unless it's me. He nodded, but as soon as he was inside, unease gripped him. The silence of his apartment wasn't comforting. It felt staged, as if the shadows themselves were waiting. He set his briefcase down, poured a glass of water, tried to breathe. Then it happened. A whisper. At first so faint he thought it was the wind, but then clear, definite. James. The glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. He spun around, empty room. The whisper came again, this time from the hallway. James, I see you. His skin crawled. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the broken glass. His heart hammered in his chest. He grabbed the nearest thing that could serve as a weapon, a heavy book from his shelf. He edged toward the hallway, pulse racing. Silence. He flicked on the light. Nothing. Just the long, empty stretch of carpet and closed doors. His phone buzzed suddenly, shrill and jarring. He fumbled it open. A text. You're listening now. Good. James froze, the words burning into his mind. Then the whisper came again, softer, right at his ear this time. I've been waiting for you, James. The phone slipped from his trembling hand. For the first time in years, James Cooper felt true fear. Chapter 5, Inside the Walls. Sleep did not come. James Cooper sat in the dark with every light off, the glow from the street lamps stripping his apartment like prison bars. The text on his phone still glared back at him. "You're listening now. Good." He had tried to rationalize it. Maybe a student playing a sick joke. Maybe some hacker. But the whisper, the voice, that wasn't something you could fake through a text. It had been in the room. It had been right behind his ear. At 2:37 a.m., his apartment creaked. The old radiator hissed, but the sound was wrong. It came in short bursts, like someone breathing. He got up and checked every lock, every window, all sealed. The whisper returned. "James, you're not alone." He spun, knocking over a chair. His heart jackhammered. "Who's there?" Silence. He grabbed his phone, called Hayes. Hung up before the first ring. What would he even say? "I'm hearing voices, Laura. Someone's in my apartment, but they're not." Instead, he crept to his study and opened his laptop. He dug through old files, lecture notes, case histories, old correspondences, looking for a clue, some pattern. Nothing. At 3:12 a.m., his email pinged. Subject line, "Remember this." He clicked. A photo appeared on screen. Grainy, dark, taken from outside his apartment window, him sitting at his desk, date stamped 20 minutes ago. James's stomach turned. His eyes shot to the window, curtains drawn, no movement outside. Another email pinged. "You're still the teacher, I'm still the student, but now you'll listen." He slammed the laptop shut. For the next hour, he prowled the apartment, lights off, gripping a kitchen knife. Every creak of the wood floor felt like a footstep, every shadow a presence. He tried breathing exercises, grounding techniques, but nothing stopped the panic. When dawn broke, he hadn't slept. His eyes were bloodshot. He caught his reflection in the mirror and barely recognized himself. Another whisper, this one almost tender. "Time to confess, Professor, before I do." His phone buzzed again, another text. "Meet me where it began." James stared at the screen, hands trembling. He knew exactly what that meant. The abandoned campus annex where he had once lectured a troubled student who disappeared. The whisperer's first obsession. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, James knew two things. He couldn't stay here. And he couldn't handle this alone much longer. He slipped his phone into his pocket, eyes darting to the window once more. A silhouette was there, or maybe just the curtain's shadow, but he didn't wait to find out. James bolted from the apartment. Chapter 6, Breaking Point. By the time James reached the precinct, he looked like a man unraveling. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes hollowed by sleeplessness, and his hand trembled as he pushed through the double doors. Detective Laura Hayes spotted him instantly from across the bullpen. Her sharp gaze softened when she took in his state. She met him halfway, placing a steadying hand on his arm. "James," she said quietly, "what happened?" He didn't answer. Not yet. Not with all the ears around them. He shook his head, lips pressed tight. Hayes read it at once. Without a word, she guided him down the hall into an empty interview room. The second the door shut, he broke. "They're in my life, Laura," he said, voice low and frantic. "Inside my apartment, my files, my head, everywhere." Hayes straightened, every muscle going taut. "Slow down, start from the beginning." James dragged both hands through his hair. "I heard him, last night, not on the phone, not in a dream, in the room, whispering my name." Her eyes narrowed. "You're sure it wasn't?" "I'm not imagining it." His voice cracked, louder than he meant. He lowered it, trembling. "I've studied delusions, paranoia, auditory hallucinations. I know what they are. This wasn't that. He was there." Hayes let the silence hang for a moment, then asked gently, "What else?" James pulled his phone from his pocket and slid it across the table. "Read the emails, the photos." She scrolled, her jaw tightening with each message. Then she froze at the photograph. It showed James at his desk, time-stamped from just hours before dawn. "Jesus Christ," she muttered. "This was taken inside your window." James nodded, his chest heaving. "He's watching me, Laura. He knows my past. He told me to meet him where it began." Where it began. James swallowed hard. "The annex. Campus building. See, I lectured there 10 years ago. I had a student who unnerved me. brilliant but cold, detached. He dropped out after a disciplinary incident, and then he vanished. Hayes leaned forward. You think that's our whisperer? I don't know, but whoever it is, they've chosen me as part of this. His hands clenched into fists. And they're not going to stop. Hayes tapped the phone screen again, studying the messages. This isn't just obsession. This is access. They're inside your personal files, your email, your home. She looked up, voice steely. That means one of two things. Either you've got a stalker with extraordinary resources, or this isn't just about you. The room seemed to shrink around them. James whispered, Then what is it about? Hayes didn't answer. She stood abruptly, packing. We'll put you under protection. I'll assign 2 uniforms outside your building tonight. That won't matter, James said bitterly. He's already inside. He doesn't need the door. Her phone buzzed. She frowned, checked it, then froze. It was the same photo. James at his desk, time-stamped, sent directly to her. Her breath caught. He's watching us now. The air thickened between them. For the first time since this nightmare began, Hayes's eyes betrayed what James already felt. Fear. Chapter 7, Hunting Shadows. The precinct's cybercrimes unit looked like a cave full of flickering stars. Rows of monitors glowed with scrolling code, maps, and surveillance footage. Detective Laura Hayes stood at the center, her coat slung over a chair, her phone clenched like a live grenade. Trace this, she ordered, sliding her phone toward a young tech specialist named Malik. Now, I want IPs, bounce points, anything. Malik whistled at the photo. Creepy. He started typing, his fingers a blur. This guy's masking everything. Tor nodes, overseas servers, dead drops, real pro stuff. Hayes folded her arms. There's always a seam. Find it. Across the room, James Cooper sat hunched on a bench, head in his hands. The murmur of keyboards and low voices only deepened his isolation. He wanted to disappear into the noise, but instead his mind kept circling back to the annex. The words meet me where it began echoing like a drumbeat. Hayes noticed him staring at nothing. James, walk me through it again. He raised his eyes. There's nothing to walk through. He's making me come to him. No, Hayes said firmly. He wants to make you think that, but we control the board, not him. James almost laughed. We don't control anything. He dropped his gaze to his hands. I can still smell the dust in that annex hallway. I can see the kid's face. What if it really is him, Laura? What if this is my fault? It's not your fault. She crouched in front of him, eyes level with his. You didn't create this monster. James looked away. I taught him. I warned the dean. I watched him walk away, and I never looked back. Now he's whispering in my ear at night. James, Hayes's voice softened. We're going to stop him, but you don't go anywhere near that building. Understood? He didn't answer. Behind them, Malik called out, Detective. Hayes straightened. Talk to me. I've got something weird. Malik said, This IP pattern, it's not random. He's bouncing through the city's own servers, City Hall, court systems, even police internal. He's piggybacking off municipal infrastructure. Hayes's stomach dropped. You're saying he's inside our systems? Like a ghost, Malik said. You shut down one path, he opens 3 more. James felt the words like a chill. Inside our systems. This wasn't just some obsessed student with a laptop in a basement. This was someone with reach. Hayes turned back to him. Do you see why you can't go? But James's mind had already drifted to the annex. It was more than a place now. It was a scar. He imagined walking down that dark hallway, seeing a figure at the end. Maybe answers, maybe death, but at least the waiting would end. I see why I have to go, he murmured. Hayes's eyes narrowed. James, don't even think about it. He stood slowly, like a man in a trance. If he wants me there, he'll keep killing until I show up. Isn't that what you said? Control the board. I said we control it, she shot back. That means we set the trap, not him. James met her gaze, his voice low. Then set it at the annex. For a moment, silence, only Malik's keyboard clicking. Hayes finally exhaled, a hard, slow breath. You're not bait, James, not on my watch. But James knew she couldn't keep him on that bench forever. And deep down, she knew it too. Chapter 8, The Annex. James Cooper waited until Hayes was distracted. Malik had just discovered another fragment of the Whisperer's digital trail, and the bullpen swarmed with detectives leaning over screens, trading clipped words like bullets. James slipped his phone into his pocket and rose slowly from the bench. His legs felt heavy, as though each step carried a verdict. He kept his head down, weaving between uniforms until the precinct doors opened, spilling him into the night. Cold air struck his face. For the first time in days, he felt clarity. If he didn't face this, he would always be the hunted. He had spent years telling his students that fear unexamined only grows. Now it was his turn. The cab ride to the old annex was short and silent. The driver didn't notice James's white knuckles gripping his briefcase, or the way his eyes never left the passing shadows. When the cab pulled up, James paid without a word and stepped out into silence. The building loomed like a mausoleum. Its windows were boarded, its bricks blackened by rain and time. James knew every crack, every doorway. The ghosts of his lectures clung to its bones. He pushed the door. It groaned open. Inside, dust swirled in the beam of his phone's flashlight. His footsteps echoed down the corridor, louder than he remembered. He passed the lecture hall where the kid had once sat in the front row, his expression unreadable. He remembered the day he'd raised his hand and asked, "What if empathy is just weakness dressed as virtue?" James's chest tightened. A whisper slithered through the hall. "Welcome back, Professor." James froze. "Where are you?" Silence. He stepped deeper, his breath shallow. The whisper came again, closer this time. "You came. You always were curious." He swung the flashlight, the beam darting over peeling paint and broken chairs. Nothing. "You wanted answers," the voice murmured. "So do I." James's phone buzzed. A text. "Look up." He tilted the light. At the end of the hall, high above, a shadow shifted in the rafters. His heart hammered. "Who are you?" The whisper became a laugh, low, drawn out, chilling. The beam flickered. His phone sputtered and died, plunging him into darkness. James's voice cracked. "Show yourself." Instead, the voice whispered, almost tender. "You shouldn't have come alone." Behind him, a door slammed shut. James spun, panic rising, just as his phone lit for a single second with another message. "Checkmate." Meanwhile, back at the precinct, Hayes was mid-sentence with Malik when she realized James was gone. "Where the hell is Cooper?" she snapped, scanning the bullpen. No one answered. Malik's face paled as he glanced at his monitor. Detective, you're gonna want to see this." On his screen was a live feed from a camera, grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. The annex hallway. And in the center of the frame, James Cooper standing alone in the dark. Hayes's stomach turned to stone. "Got him it." She grabbed her coat. "Mobilize a team now." Chapter 9, In the Dark. The air inside the annex felt thicker now, clinging to James's lungs. Every breath echoed, every heartbeat thundered against the silence. The single word on his phone, checkmate, burned in his mind like a brand. He tried to steady himself, gripping the useless flashlight like a weapon. The beam had died, leaving him blind, but he refused to drop it. "Why me?" he called into the dark. His voice bounced back, smaller, broken. "Why now?" The whisper floated down from above, drawn out and playful. "Because you left me behind, Professor, and the forgotten never forget." James's throat went dry. He searched the shadows, desperate for movement, for anything to anchor him. "If this is about the past, then come out. Let me see your face." A laugh rippled across the rafters, more animal than human. "Faces are masks, you taught me that. The real truth lives in the shadows." James felt the weight of eyes on him. He couldn't see them, but he knew they were there. Watching, studying. "You're not a teacher anymore," the voice whispered. "You're a lesson." He stumbled backward, bumping into a door. He shoved it open, the hinges shrieking, and found himself in the lecture hall. Moonlight spilled faintly through broken windows, casting long, skeletal shadows across rows of decayed chairs. This was the room, the place he remembered, the scar. James's chest heaved. He remembered that student, quiet, intense, eyes that never blinked enough. He remembered warning signs, disciplinary reports, the dean brushing it aside. And now here he was again, dragged back into the wound. "Why this place?" James demanded, voice cracking. "Why bring me here?" The whisper coiled behind his ear, as if the speaker stood inches away. "Because this is where you made me." James whipped around. Nothing, only the darkness staring back. His phone vibrated again. He raised it, hands shaking. Another text. "Turn around slowly." His stomach knotted. He turned, trembling, and saw a figure at the far end of the hall. Just a silhouette, tall and thin, unmoving. James's breath caught. His voice was barely a whisper. "Who are you?" The figure tilted its head, studying him. Then it stepped back into the shadows and vanished. James stumbled forward, desperation overriding fear. "Wait, don't run." The floor groaned above. Footsteps, more than one. Panic surged. Was he surrounded? He spun, scanning the dark. His pulse roared in his ears. Then, a crash. The lecture hall door blew open. Flashlights seared the darkness. Boots thundered against the wood floor. "Police, hands where I can see them." James flinched, blinded, as Hayes burst in at the front of the line, weapon raised. "James," she shouted, "get down now." He dropped to his knees, relief flooding him so fast it made him dizzy. Somewhere above, the whisper hissed, furious, fatting into the rafters. "You brought them, naughty professor." Then silence. Hayes stormed across the room, yanking James to his feet. "What the hell were you thinking?" James's voice shook. "He was here, I saw him, right there." He pointed toward the shadows. "He's real, Laura, he's real." Hayes's jaw tightened, her eyes scanning the rafters. "Then let's drag him out of his shadows." Chapter 10, Cat and Mouse. The annex exploded into motion. Hayes signaled with sharp gestures, and SWAT fanned out, flashlights cutting jagged lines through the dust-choked air. "Clear the stairs," one officer barked. "Rafters, rafters, watch your angles," another warned. James pressed against the wall, heart hammering, as beams of light slashed the shadows where the whisperer had stood only seconds before. A burst of static cracked through Hayes's radio. "Movement, northeast wing." "Go," Hayes shouted, charging forward with two officers at her heels. She glanced back once. "Stay here, James." But James couldn't. His legs carried him forward before he realized it, drawn deeper into the nightmare like a moth to flame. The team stormed the corridor, boots pounding, doors kicked open one by one. A light flickered at the far end, swinging like a pendulum. "Freeze!" a SWAT officer yelled, weapon raised. The silhouette appeared again, tall, thin, head cocked unnaturally to the side. For one breathless second, James thought they had him. Then the figure stepped back, and the light shattered. Darkness swallowed the hall. "Flashlights up," Hayes barked. Beams cut across peeling wallpaper and broken lockers, but the silhouette was gone. Only the echo of footsteps remained, darting across the ceiling beams above. "He's in the rafters." Up top, up top." SWAT fired stun rounds, splinters raining down, but the rafters stretched on like a maze. Shadows leapt, shifted, mocked them. James craned his neck, chest tight, catching glimpses. A shoe scuff, the sweep of a coat, but never enough to lock eyes. Then came the whisper. Not one voice, but many, scattered through the annex's walls, bouncing off vents and ducts. "You can't catch a shadow." Hayes cursed under her breath. "He's using the building, knows every corner." A sudden crash echoed from the far stairwell. Hayes sprinted toward it, signaling two officers to flank. James followed despite himself, pulse pounding like a drum. They burst through the stairwell door just as it swung shut on its hinges. SWAT surged upward, lights dancing off rusted rails. But at the top landing, only emptiness awaited. A single message, scrawled in chalk across the wall. "Still listening, Professor." James's breath hitched. He's taunting us. No, Hayes growled, jaw tight. He's buying time. As if to prove her point, another shout rang out from below. West exit, he's heading out. The team thundered back down, James caught in the surge, his mind spinning. They reached the exit doors just in time to see them swing closed, night air rushing in. By the time they hit the alley, it was empty. Only the echo of footsteps faded into the city beyond. Hayes slammed her hand against the wall, fury flashing in her eyes. Damn it, he slipped us. James leaned against the doorway, shaking. Somewhere out there, the Whisperer was walking free, mocking them, mocking him. But in the silence of that alley, James realized something that chilled him more than the escape itself. The Whisperer hadn't tried to kill him tonight. He'd lured him here, played the game, and let him live. Which meant the real lesson wasn't over. It had only just begun. Chapter 11, The Watcher. James sat on the edge of his bed, still wearing the same clothes he'd chased shadows in hours earlier. His shirt stuck damp to his back, and dust from the annex clung to his hair. The apartment was silent, too silent. He hadn't turned on the lights. Somehow, darkness felt safer, as if keeping himself hidden would keep the Whisperer out. His pulse refused to settle, ears tuned for every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator. Somewhere in that stillness, James swore he heard it again. The whisper. Not words this time, but a hiss threading through the vents, like someone breathing just beyond the walls. He grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the door. Slowly, carefully, he crossed the room and pressed his ear against the plaster. Nothing. But he couldn't shake the sense that the Whisperer had been there, leaving behind an echo only James could hear. On his desk, a slip of paper waited, notes he'd scribbled during lectures earlier in the week. But his eyes caught something new at the margin. His penmanship was tight, controlled. The scrawl beside it was, "Good chase, Professor." James staggered back, the bat clattering to the floor. He hadn't written that. He knew he hadn't. The whisper had been here, inside. He locked every bolt, checked every window, then sat against the wall with the bat across his knees until dawn bled pale light across the blinds. Sleep never came, only the sensation of being watched. Chapter 12, Precinct Pressure. By the time James dragged himself into the precinct, the world felt raw, edges sharpened by sleeplessness. Hayes stood at the center of chaos, barking orders, phones ringing off the hook. SWAT reports were spread across the table like a failed blueprint. "He toyed with us," she said the moment she saw James. Her eyes were bloodshot but burning. "In and out, no trace, he's laughing at us." James swallowed, his throat dry. "He was in my apartment." The room froze, Hayes's jaw tightened. "You sure?" He nodded, sliding the piece of paper from his pocket. The message stared up at them, mocking, alive in its taunt. "Good chase, Professor." One of the detectives muttered, "How the hell did he get in?" James whispered, almost to himself. "He wanted me to know he could." Hayes slammed her palm on the table. "Enough games. He wants to make this personal. Fine, we'll make it personal. No more waiting for him to slip. We hunt him, corner him, break him." But James felt the hollowness in her words. Last night had proved it. The Whisperer wasn't just ahead of them. He was inside their lives, their routines, their walls. And for the first time, James wasn't sure if he was the bait or the target. Chapter 13, Lines in the Sand. The squad room buzzed with a nervous energy, a mix of fear and exhaustion simmering under fluorescent lights. Half-empty coffee cups dotted the tables, crime scene photos plastered the boards like grisly wallpaper. Every eye was on Hayes. She paced at the front, jaw clenched, hands gripping the edge of the whiteboard like she could bend it to her will. "The Whisperer isn't guessing," she said, voice sharp. "He's not stumbling onto opportunities. He's watching us. He knows our movements. He's reading our playbook before we've even drawn it up." A detective in the corner muttered, "Maybe he's got someone feeding him intel." Hayes froze, eyes narrowing. "You suggesting a mole?" Silence. No one met her gaze. James leaned forward, palms flat on the table. His voice was hoarse from lack of sleep, but steady. It's not a mole. He's inside our heads. He wants us doubting each other. Hayes gave him a look that was half respect, half suspicion. Maybe he's deeper than that. She jabbed a finger at the map pinned on the board, red dots clustered like a rash across the city. He knows the precinct schedule, the patrol rotations. He anticipated our raid on the annex. That's not just psychology, Professor. That's logistics. Another detective, Ruiz, crossed his arms. So what, you want us to assume he's everywhere? That he's some kind of ghost? If we do that, we'll chase shadows until we drop. Hayes slammed a fist on the desk. We already are. The room flinched, even James. She leaned in, voice lower now, almost a growl. We have two choices. Either we admit he's smarter than us and keep playing catch-up, or we change the rules. What rules? Ruiz shot back. Hayes's eyes flicked to James before returning to the room. We stop reacting. We bait him. Use what he wants most, Professor Cooper, and turn it against him. A ripple of unease passed through the detectives. James felt it like a cold draft crawling under the door. He straightened. You want me to be the target? You already are, Hayes said. The only difference is whether we pretend otherwise, or we use it to end this. The room went quiet. Phones rang in the distance. The hum of the precinct, filling the silence between heartbeats. James's gut twisted. He wanted to argue, to push back, but the slip of paper in his pocket, the one that said "Good chase, Professor," burned like proof. Hayes was right. The Whisperer had chosen him. And there was no walking away from that now. Chapter 14. Behind Closed Doors. The conference room was dim, the blinds drawn tight against the morning sun. A single lamp cast harsh shadows across the table where James sat, fingers laced, eyes locked on Hayes. She closed the door with a quiet click, the sound final, like the ceiling of a vault. Talk, James said, his voice low. Hayes didn't sit. She paced, her boots striking the tile in sharp, deliberate steps. I'm not asking you, Professor. I'm telling you. You're the bait. It's the only card we have left. James shook his head. You're not using me as a pawn. You're already a pawn, she snapped, spinning to face him. You just don't like admitting it. His jaw tightened. I'm not a cop. I didn't sign up to play decoy in some suicidal trap. No, she said, stepping closer. But you signed up the moment you walked into that apartment and saw your name carved into the wall. Don't pretend you're a bystander anymore. James leaned back in the chair, fighting the pressure building in his chest. He's not after justice. He's after theater. The second I put myself out there, I'm giving him his stage. Hayes slammed both hands on the table, leaning in until her face was inches from his. Her voice dropped, rough with anger and something else, desperation. He already has his stage, James. The bodies are his audience. How many more do you want to watch him collect before you admit we're out of options? The words hit him like a punch. He looked away, staring at the blinds. Slats of light cut across his reflection in the glass, slicing his features into pieces. He'll kill me, James said finally, voice almost a whisper. Hayes studied him for a long moment, then straightened. Then let's make damn sure he fails. But I can't do it without you. James turned back, meeting her eyes. For the first time, he saw the fatigue etched deep beneath her composure, the weight of command dragging at her. She wasn't just driving him into danger. She was walking into it beside him. Still, fear coiled tight in his gut. He wanted to refuse, to walk out, to disappear. But the Whisperer's words echoed in his head. Good chase, Professor. He clenched his fists. If we do this, we do it my way. I know how he thinks, you don't. Hayes allowed herself the smallest nod. Fine, your way, but you don't get to vanish on me again. You break ranks one more time, I'll cuff you myself. James gave a bitter laugh. I'd like to see you try. The tension hung between them, sharp as glass. For the first time, it wasn't clear who was hunting whom, James and Hayes after the Whisperer, or the Whisperer pulling them both deeper into his game. Chapter 15. The Setup. They treated the meeting like a war council. The briefing room stank of stale coffee and too many late nights. Whiteboards were covered in routes, timelines, and names, red ink tracing the Whisperer's movements like a spider web. Hayes moved through it all with the authority of someone who had to make other people believe in hope long before she felt it. "Listen up," she said. "We've got one chance at this. One controlled environment where we can monitor every entry, every exit, every signal. We put Cooper where he says the Whisperer wants him, annex, front row, and we surround him with eyes he can't see." Malik, pale and wired from hours at the keyboard, pumped his fists as if to loosen the tension. "I can seed city cams with honey traps, mirror the feed to 2 secure servers, and scrub the network for any funny hops. If he touches a municipal node, we'll get a trace. Maybe not a direct IP, but a breadcrumb." Hayes nodded. "Good, we use those breadcrumbs to funnel him. We bait him with Cooper, but the nets, the traps, they don't move unless we say so. SWAT covers ingress and egress. Plainclothes watch the perimeter. Forensics is on standby. If he shows up, any sign, we box him." Across the table, James watched the plan take shape in brisk, forensic lines. He felt oddly detached, like someone watching a film of himself. He insisted the Whisperer wanted theater. It felt like they were now building a stage. The thought both steadied him and made his skin crawl. "Hayes," he said softly, "if he's as clever as we think, he won't come through the front door. He'll exploit the seams, the vents, the municipal systems Malik mentioned, even the patterns of our patrols. He's patient. He waits until we believe the play is over, then he changes the scene." "Then we close the seams," Hayes said. "We check vents. We shadow every maintenance crew. We get nails in every coffin. You won't be alone in that hall, James. You'll have a direct line to me, and to a team that understands how to move when I say move." Ruiz, arms folded, let out a skeptical grunt. "And what if this is a trap for us? What if the Whisperer knew we bait him and instead uses Cooper to get to someone else, someone with access to prosecution or the DA?" "Then we plan for that too," Malik said. "We assume he's reading 3 steps ahead. We scatter decoys, fake files, make him believe he can control the narrative while we watch him twist the pieces." Hayes stared at James. "You sure about the location? If you get cold feet, say so now." James swallowed. The annex was a scar he could not forget. It would be cruel, elegant theater for the Whisperer, to bring the professor back to the place where the first fissure had formed. But it also fit the model. The Whisperer wanted him there on his terms. Drawing the predator into a web meant using the predator's own language. It was ruthless. It was necessary. "I'm sure," James said. "But we must be surgical, no theatrics, no live public confrontation. If we end this with headlines, we lose control." Hayes gave a short nod. No theatrics. They moved to logistics. Hayes assigned 2 teams. One, labeled Visible, comprised uniformed officers who would patrol the exterior and canvass the immediate blocks. The other, Invisible, was plainclothes and tech Malik, 2 cyber analysts and an evidence tech, positioned out of sight with encrypted comms. SWAT would be staged nearby, ready to roll but not visible, a quiet thunder at the edge of the scene. "Cooper will be wired," Hayes said. "Body mic, 2 cameras, 1 static on the podium, 1 shoulder rig on him. He sits front and center. Malik will stream the feed. Any anomaly and we go loud." James's throat tightened at the word wired. He'd been in recordings before, consulted, lectured. But being live, being bait, was different. The intimacy of sound frightened him. The whisper had already proven it could dismantle him. "Control for sound interference?" he asked. "If he uses vents, we need directional mics, throat mics on me, and parabolic sweeps. If he masks, we still need to pick up the pattern." Malik's fingers flew. "I'll run white noise drones, low-level, tactical, so he can't piggyback frequencies. Also," he hesitated lower now, "we can pre-program false logins and alerts to confuse his routing. He'll think he sees things where we want him to look." "Good," Hayes said. "Anything else?" Ruiz added, "We put a few trusted people in as audience members. Civilians who can act and can leave on command. If the Whisperer expects loneliness, we give him witnesses. If he expects a trap, we make the trap a stage." They planned contingencies, medical on site, extraction routes, a black bag for evidence. They rehearsed radio codes, fallback signals, and escape routes through alleys that James could not see from his mental map of the annex. Time was carved into minutes. Arrival, 10 minutes, 30 minutes. 1,000 micro-decisions folded into a single choreography. When the meeting broke, James stood in the quiet while the others gathered equipment and colored sticky notes. He could hear his own pulse in his ears, a slow drumbeat of something like resolve. Hayes stepped up and touched his shoulder with a quick firmness that might have been comfort if either of them had believed in comfort anymore. "Once you sit down," she said, "you do what I tell you. You play the part. You bait him into revealing himself. And when you're done, we end it." James let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. "When I sit," he said, "I will watch the audience. He's always been a voyeur. He'll watch them too. If I can read him, if I can find his rhythm, maybe we can pin him in the silence between his breaths." Hayes's eyes were bright now, not with fear but with something harder, determination. "Then let's go pin a ghost." Outside, the city moved on, cars, early commuters, a world that had no idea a net was being spun behind the scenes. Inside, they folded their fears into duty and loaded cameras, microphones, and courage into cases. James left the room with a wired vest waiting against the chair, a stage to get onto and a shadow to go tug at. He felt the old, clinical calm settle in for the first time in weeks. Analysts might call it dissociation. He called it focus. He had taught students to sit with monsters and call them by their patterns. Now he had to do it himself. They would put the bait in place. They would switch on the lights, and then they would wait. The whisperer was the first to speak in the dark, and James intended to answer. Chapter 16, The Stay. The annex had always been too quiet. Even when it bustled with city workers in the day, the building seemed to muffle sound, swallowing footsteps and voices into its walls. At night, with the lamps burning low and the corridors empty, it felt like a mausoleum. James adjusted the wire under his shirt as Hayes walked him to the hall. The body mic pressed against his chest, the shoulder camera tugging at the seam of his jacket. Each piece of gear made him feel less like a man and more like a prop. "You good?" Hayes asked, keeping her voice low, calm. "Define good," James muttered. She gave him a sharp look. "This only works if you're steady. Once you sit, you don't fidget with the gear, you don't break posture, and you sure as hell don't improvise. You're a professor giving a lecture, nothing more." James forced a thin smile. "That I can do." But inside, his stomach churned. They entered the hall. Rows of metal chairs had been set up in careful disorder, a scattering of notebooks on a few seats to suggest an audience that might have stepped out. A faint hum from the air vents stirred the stale air. Malik's voice crackled in James's ear through the comm. "Audio clean, video rolling, you're live." James swallowed. He knew that somewhere beyond the walls, a van was humming with surveillance equipment, techs monitoring his every breath. SWAT waited in silence, parked blocks away, ready to move on Hayes's order. Plainclothes officers lingered at the perimeter, masks of bored pedestrians hiding their tension. But in here, James was alone. He walked to the front, the soles of his shoes echoing off the floor. He placed his bag on the table, pulled out a few papers, set them in neat stacks. A lecturer preparing, a decoy at the podium. His eyes flicked to the audience of empty chairs. In his mind, he filled them with faces, Margaret Lee, the others whose lives had ended in silence. Their eyes stared back, accusing, waiting. James lowered himself into the chair, spine rigid, palms flat on the table. The air vent whispered overhead. Whispered. He resisted the urge to look up. "Professor," Malik said softly in his ear, "we've got movement 2 blocks out. Possible approach, could be nothing, stay steady." Hayes's voice cut in firm. "Hold positions. No one jumps until I say." James drew a slow breath. His pulse was steady now, the same strange calm that had taken him in the planning meeting. He was no longer afraid, not in the usual sense. Fear had been replaced by a clarity that came from knowing the moment was inevitable. The whisper would come, and James would be waiting. Minutes dragged. The hum of the light seemed louder than it should. Somewhere in the building, a pipe creaked, and James felt his heart jerk before forcing it back to rhythm. Then he heard it. A sound so soft he thought at first it was his imagination. The faintest scrape, like metal on concrete, coming from the vent above. James didn't move, didn't even blink. "Hayes," Malik whispered urgently into the comm. "Vent disturbance, north wall above Cooper." "Hayes, all units stand by. Wait for confirmation." The scrape came again, longer this time. Then silence. James kept his gaze fixed on the papers before him. His lips barely moved as he whispered, "He's here." The silence pressed on him. James stared at the papers on the table, forcing his breath to remain even. Every instinct screamed at him to look up, to track the vent, to find the source of that faint scrape. But he knew that was what the whisperer wanted. Fear betrayed itself in movement. Fear turned a man into prey. The vent sighed, a hush of air too deliberate. "Audio's spiking," Malik's voice buzzed in his ear. "Someone's manipulating the airflow. Could be a probe mic, could be." Hayes cut him off. "Stay quiet. Cooper holds, everyone holds." James felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. He knew this game. Predators didn't strike immediately. They toyed, circled, waited for the smallest weakness. He was the stage, the script, the audience all at once. And then it came. A whisper, faint but clear, sliding down the vent like smoke. "Professor." James's skin went cold. The voice was low, intimate, as if the killer were crouched just above him, lips against the metal. "Do they know?" the whisper murmured. "Do they know what you hide?" James didn't move. He let the words sink into him, steadying his mind as if they were merely text on a page. "You're not in control here," he said softly, his own whisper measured, calculated. "You never were." The reply was a chuckle, too soft for anyone but him to hear. Malik's voice was urgent in his ear. "We've got a thermal spike. North vent is live. Someone's feeding sound in. Hayes, give the order." "Negative," Hayes said. Her tone was steel. "We wait. He hasn't shown himself." James's palms were damp. He could feel his pulse in his fingertips, but his voice stayed level. "You've made a mistake coming here." A pause, then the whisper hissed, "You're the mistake." The vent rattled. A tiny metal screw dropped, pinging on the floor near his chair. James didn't flinch. Hayes whispered into the comm, "He's testing him. Hold steady, James. We've got you covered." But James wasn't so sure. The whisperer knew the layout as well as they did, maybe better. If he'd reached the vent unseen, what else had he slipped past? Another sound now, a faint creak, not above but behind. From the far side of the hall, in the shadows where two doors met. James felt it deep in his gut. The vent was the distraction. The real entry was already in motion. His throat tightened, but his mind sharpened. Classic misdirection. He splits the gaze, and in the silence between he moves. James whispered, almost inaudible, "He's not above me, he's behind." Hayes swore softly in his ear. "Units shift, back door, South Hall, now." James forced himself to remain still, every nerve in his body screaming. Somewhere in the darkness, the whisperer had slipped down, soundless, a shadow threading the seams of the annex. The game had begun. And James knew, with sickening certainty, that it would be played at breath's length. Chapter 17. The door blew inward on a thundercrack. Flashbangs tumbled across the marble floor, blooming light like lightning. James flinched, ears ringing, vision seared white. Then the world resolved into chaos, SWAT pouring through, weapons raised, voices colliding with commands. "Clear, clear." Eyes on the hall. James staggered to his feet, heart hammering. He wanted to shout at them to stop, to tell them the whisperer was already inside, already moving, but the noise drowned everything. A shadow detached from the far wall, slipping through the fissure of smoke and light. Smooth, calculated. The whisperer's voice, low and intimate, somehow threaded through the din. "You're too slow, James." James spun, weapon raised. A glimpse black hood, gloved hand, a knife glinting like ice. Then gone, swallowed by smoke. "Contact, west side." One of the SWAT men bellowed. Muzzle flashes sparked. Bullets chewed plaster. The Whisperer ghosted between pillars, letting the team's fire cover his escape. James lunged after him, adrenaline shredding caution. He's here, cut him off. Too late. The figure darted into the stairwell. James followed, boots pounding, while Hayes's voice erupted behind him. More! Fall back, damn it. The stairwell reeked of cordite and dust. James caught a flicker of movement, then a flashbang detonated above. His balance faltered. The Whisperer was a shadow at the top of the stairs, watching, waiting, and then vanishing. James staggered forward, throat raw with fury. The team was in disarray, blind and deaf from their own storm. The Whisperer had turned their trap into theater and slipped right through the cracks. In the settling silence, James heard his own breath, ragged and useless. The operation wasn't just compromised, it was inverted. The Whisperer had let them come and left laughing. Chapter 18. The door crashed open before James could even steady his breathing. Hayes stormed in, her eyes flashing, followed by 2 agents fanning their weapons across the empty room. The silence hit them all like a second gunshot, heavy, damning. Where the hell is he? Hayes barked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. James clenched his fists. He was here, he was right here. The words came out rough, torn from his throat, as if speaking them would somehow pull the Whisperer back into the light. Hayes' jaw worked. She scanned the empty chair across from James, the untouched glass of water, the faint disturbance in the air that told its own story. Then her gaze swung back to him. And you let him slip through. James surged to his feet, the chair screeching back across the tiles. I didn't let him, he outplayed us. He was in control the second he walked through that door. The other agents exchanged glances, uneasy. Hayes stepped closer, close enough that her words hit like a whisper but carried the weight of an indictment. You insisted on running point. You wanted him one-on-one, and now he's gone. James's voice dropped, tight and hoarse. Not gone, he's circling us, playing with us. This was never about walking into custody, it was about showing us he could walk out. Hayes stared at him, her fury tempered by something more dangerous, fear. Then he knows our playbook, he knows how close we are. A radio crackled in the hallway. No sign on the perimeter, cameras show static, nothing. The room went cold. James rubbed a hand over his face, the sting of failure biting deep. He could still feel the Whisperer's presence like a ghost brushing the edges of his mind. That voice, low, steady, laced with menace, echoed in his memory. You think you're ready for me. You're not. Hayes finally turned to the others. Lock down the building. I want eyes on every exit, every alley, every shadow. If he's still here, we smoke him out. If he's gone, she snapped her head back toward James. Then we rebuild from the ground up, and next time more, we do it my way. James didn't argue. He just stood in the middle of the room, pulse hammering, rage twisting with shame. The Whisperer had beaten them at their own game, and every second ticking by was another reminder that the hunter had just become the hunted. Chapter 19. The interrogation room was empty again. The chair where the Whisperer had sat mocked James, still angled toward him, as though the killer's shadow had burned itself into the space. He stared at it long after the others had cleared out, unable to shake the hollow weight pressing down on his chest. Every breath felt wrong, too shallow, too fast. His palms were damp, his pulse a constant drum in his ears. He dragged a hand across his mouth, tasting the sour bite of adrenaline still lodged in his system. You think you're ready for me. You're not. The Whisperer's words wouldn't let go. They looped in his mind, curling into the cracks of his resolve like smoke. James had built his career on control, on sharp instinct and steadiness under fire. But tonight, he'd been played like a rookie. He replayed every second. The flicker in the Whisperer's eyes, the tilt of his head. The way he'd leaned forward as if daring James to blink. James had thought he'd been tracking subtle cues, keeping the upper hand. But in truth, he'd been strung along until the floor disappeared beneath him. He gripped the edge of the table, knuckles blanching, and pressed his forehead against the cool surface. What haunted him wasn't just the escape, It was the realization that the Whisperer had been studying him. Every hesitation, every flicker of anger, every instinctive twitch catalogued and filed away. He hadn't been the hunter in that room. He'd been the experiment. The walls of the room seemed to tighten, pushing him inward. He sucked in a breath, forced himself to lift his head, and muttered under his breath, "You don't get to live in here, not in my head." But it was a hollow promise. The Whisperer already lived there, camped in the corners of his mind. And James knew it wouldn't stop until one of them was buried. The door swung open with a metallic groan, yanking him back. Hayes stood there, stiff with contained fury. Behind her, a blur of noise echoed down the hall, phones ringing, voices raised, the newsroom-like chaos of a precinct under siege. "Media's circling," she said flatly. "Command wants answers, and the brass, they're sharpening knives." James dragged himself upright, trying to shake off the weight pressing on him. His throat was dry, but he forced words through it. "Then let's go bleed for them." Hayes's eyes narrowed, assessing him. She saw the cracks. She had to, but she said nothing. Just jerked her head toward the door. Together, they walked out into the storm. James followed Hayes down the corridor, each step heavier than the last. The precinct had turned into a hive. Phones rang with a desperate urgency, officers barked updates into radios, and a low, restless murmur rolled through the bullpen like a rising tide. The scent of burnt coffee and stress filled the air. But it wasn't the noise that pressed on James, it was the looks, the quick glances that darted away when he caught them. The subtle shake of a head. He didn't need words to hear it, he blew it. He had the Whisperer and he blew it. He peeled off from Hayes, muttering that he needed a minute, and ducked into the stairwell. Cool air, dim light, silence, at least here, the weight of 100 eyes couldn't pin him down. He leaned against the railing, drawing a long breath that rattled in his chest. His hands were still trembling. He hated that. He balled them into fists, pressed them into his sides. The Whisperer would have seen it, every crack, every flaw. James had always believed that obsession was the killer's tell, the mark that made them sloppy. But now he realized the trap. Obsession worked both ways, and the Whisperer had baited him into it. He heard himself whisper, "You won't win." The words were barely audible, more a plea than a declaration. A beat of silence answered him, broken only by the hum of the building. For a split second, he almost expected the Whisperer's voice to seep from the shadows, mocking him. Instead, the stairwell door clanged open. Hayes stepped inside, her expression tight. She didn't say anything at first, just studied him. James straightened, scrubbing his hands down his face as though he could wipe the doubt away. "You look like hell," she said finally. "Thanks," James muttered, voice dry. Hayes leaned against the opposite railing. "Listen, whatever's eating you, bury it. The room we're about to walk into, they'll smell blood in a heartbeat. Command, brass, press, all of them. They'll want a scapegoat, and right now you're the easy pick." James met her gaze. "So let them take me." Her eyes narrowed. "That's not how this works. If they gut you, they gut the whole case. The Whisperer wins twice, once for slipping past us, and again when we tear ourselves apart afterward." He wanted to argue, but the truth of it sat heavy in his gut. She was right. Hayes pushed off the railing and moved toward the door. "Get your head straight, Moore. In 5 minutes, you're walking into a room where every shark in the city smells blood. Decide now if you're bleeding or biting back." The door slammed shut behind her. James stayed in the stairwell, breathing hard, the choice pressing down like a vice. Chapter 20. The briefing room felt less like a table and more like a tribunal. A half-dozen commanders sat in sharp lines, their uniforms pressed and their expressions sharper. Behind them, a wall of screens flickered with news anchors already speculating about the phantom killer's vanishing act. James walked in with Hayes at his side. The hum of voices quieted instantly, replaced by a silence that was heavier than accusation. Every eye turned toward him. "Detective Moore," Chief Reynolds said, his voice clipped. "Have a seat." James sat. The chair might as well have been a spotlight. Hayes took the seat next to him, her posture rigid, like she was daring anyone to take a swing at her partner. The chief leaned forward, fingers steepled. We had him, on our terms, in our building, and now—" He jabbed a finger at one of the screens, where a chyron screamed the whisperer slips through police hands. "Now the city thinks we're incompetent." Murmurs rippled through the room. James kept his eyes on the table, jaw tight. "Explain," another commander demanded. "What went wrong in there?" Hayes opened her mouth, but James beat her to it. His voice was low, steady, but it carried the edge of glass about to break. "He never came to surrender. He came to play. Every word, every move. He was testing me, testing us. And the second we thought we had control, he walked out." "That's not an explanation," Reynolds snapped. "That's a failure dressed up as an excuse." The words hit hard, but James didn't flinch. He forced himself to meet the chief's gaze. "Then call it what it is. We failed tonight, but don't mistake failure for weakness. He's watching us now, closer than ever. He wanted to prove he could walk away, and he did. But in doing that, he left us something." A skeptical voice piped up. "And what exactly did he leave us, Detective? Empty rooms and static on our cameras." James leaned forward, his voice dropping into the kind of quiet that carried more weight than shouting. "He left us a trail. He couldn't resist showing off. The way he entered, the timing, the things he said, he wanted me to notice. He wanted me to obsess. That's his mistake, because now I know how he thinks." The room went still. Hayes watched him, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, maybe doubt, maybe belief. Reynolds leaned back, expression unreadable. "You're telling me you lost him, and that's your strategy, to let him crawl inside your head and hope you figure him out before he buries another body." James didn't blink. "I'm telling you that if we keep fighting him by the book, we'll lose every time. He's writing his own playbook. We either learn it or keep burying victims." Silence stretched. The brass shifted uneasily, torn between outrage and the uneasy sense that James might be right. Finally, Reynolds spoke again, quieter this time. "Then you'd better make damn sure this trail you're talking about leads somewhere, because the next failure won't just cost you a case. It'll cost you your badge." The meeting dissolved into murmurs and logistical chatter. Hayes rose first, her chair scraping against the floor. James followed, shoulders heavy but mind burning. He didn't care about his badge. He cared about one thing: the Whisperer was still out there, and now the hunt had become personal. Chapter 21. The Whisperer sat in the back of the cab, city lights flickering across his face like a slow strobe. To the driver, he was just another man in a cheap suit, collar askew, face half hidden behind glasses. Forgettable. That was always the goal. But behind the stillness, his mind was alive, humming with satisfaction. He replayed the look on Detective Moore's face as the trap dissolved. The clenched jaw, the flicker of disbelief, it was almost art. "You thought you had me," he murmured under his breath, just enough for his own ears. The driver didn't even glance up. The Whisperer leaned his head against the cool window, watching the city blur by. This place had always fascinated him, the chaos of it, the anonymity. It was a jungle built of concrete and glass, and in every jungle predators ruled. And tonight had proved something important. Moore wasn't just a cop with a badge and a file. He was the kind who thought he could understand the darkness if he stared hard enough into it. That kind was dangerous. That kind was tempting. "He's circling me already," the Whisperer thought. "Good. Let him circle. The tighter the orbit, the harder the fall." He had left breadcrumbs, subtle enough that only Moore would notice. A turn of phrase, a twitch of the hand, the cadence of a sentence designed to burrow into the detective's brain. He wanted Moore to chew on them, lose sleep over them. Follow them until he was hopelessly tangled in the web. Because the beauty of a hunt wasn't in the kill, it was in the breaking. The cab stopped at an intersection. He paid in cash, stepped out, and disappeared into the crowd. Above him, a news ticker scrolled across a high-rise, the Whisperer still 8T large. A laugh bubbled up in his chest, quiet but sharp. The city feared him, the police despised him, but only Moore mattered. Only Moore was worth the game. He turned into an alley, shadows swallowing him whole, and whispered to the empty air. "Your move, detective." Chapter 22. The warehouse smelled of dust and rot. Rusted pipes groaned in the rafters, and broken glass crunched beneath the Whisperer's boots as he crossed the floor. He carried no light. He didn't need one. He knew every turn, every shadow. This place had been abandoned for years, forgotten by the city that hummed outside its walls. But for him, it was a stage. He stopped at a workbench where a row of objects waited. A cracked metronome, its arm frozen mid-swing. A leather-bound journal with its spine nearly broken. A stack of Polaroids curling at the edges. He picked one up and studied it, an image of Detective James Moore entering the precinct months ago, eyes sharp even when he thought no one was watching. The Whisperer's lips curved. "You don't know how long I've been watching." He set the photo down carefully and turned his attention to the journal. Its pages were filled with notes written in a precise, elegant hand. Half were observations about victims, times, places, fears. The other half were about Moore, details that only someone obsessed could compile. His gait, the way he favored his left side when tired, the exact time his shift ended 3 nights out of 5. He tapped the page with a finger. Patterns, always patterns. And when you know a man's patterns, you know his breaking points. From his pocket, he pulled a folded newspaper clipping and slid it between the pages. The headline screamed police baffled as serial killer ESCAPES interrogation. The clipping wasn't for him, it was for Moore. Another breadcrumb waiting to be found. He closed the journal with a soft thud and leaned back against the bench, listening to the silence of the warehouse. The silence always comforted him. It was the one thing he could control absolutely. But the silence tonight was sweeter, heavier, because he knew Moore wouldn't sleep. He knew the detective would pace, analyze, tear at every memory of the interrogation until his thoughts frayed. And when exhaustion made him sloppy, when obsession made him reckless, that was when the real game would begin. The Whisperer allowed himself one final whisper to the shadows. "It's not about catching me, James. It's about surviving me." Then he melted back into the darkness, leaving the metronome behind. Its frozen arm twitched once, faintly, as if daring time to resume. Chapter 23. James sat alone in his apartment, the city spread outside his window like a restless sea of lights. The clock on his wall ticked past 2:00 a.m., but sleep wasn't even a possibility. Every time he closed his eyes, the Whisperer's face filled the dark. Calm, amused, untouchable. He spread a mess of papers across the coffee table. His notes, surveillance stills, old case files. He traced them with his fingertips, trying to thread them into something coherent. But each time he circled back to the interrogation, to the way the Whisperer had leaned in and said, "You think you're ready for me? You're not." James clenched his jaw and replayed it again. Not just the words, the rhythm, the emphasis, the strange lilt. It wasn't random. Nothing about the Whisperer was random. Then he noticed something odd, the metronome's sketch. It was scrawled in the margins of his notepad, almost subconsciously, while he'd been talking on the phone earlier. He hadn't even realized he'd drawn it. But the more he stared at it, the more it nagged at him. Tick, tick, tick. He flipped through his files and found the old crime scene photos. 2 different victims had metronomes in their apartments. Both had been found on shelves, arms frozen mid-swing. At the time, it had seemed like coincidence. Now it felt deliberate. "Damn it," James muttered, shoving back from the table. He stood and paced the room, heart hammering. This was the breadcrumb. The Whisperer had left it for him, another taunt. He could see the pattern forming, even if the edges were still blurry. The sharp knock at his door startled him. He grabbed his service pistol instinctively before moving to the peephole. "Hayes." He unlatched the locks and opened the door. She stepped inside, taking in the chaos of papers and photographs scattered like wreckage. "You're a mess," she said, her voice half exasperated, half worried. James rubbed at his face. "He left me something, Hayes. He wanted me to see it." "James." He cut her off, his voice sharp. The metronomes, 2 victims, both apartments, both arms frozen. And tonight, when he sat across from me, he mimicked the rhythm. Subtle, but it was there. Like he was ticking off seconds until he decided to walk. Hayes crossed her arms. "You're telling me the guy's building his kills around a clock." James shook his head. Not a clock, control. He freezes time. He takes people's lives and then leaves the moment suspended. That's his signature. Hayes studied him, skeptical but thoughtful. So where does that get us? James stopped packing, his eyes burning with a mix of exhaustion and obsession. It gets us closer to knowing where he'll be next. Because if he's leaving breadcrumbs, it's not just to taunt me, it's to pull me into his pattern. And if I follow it right, I can find the next stage before he does. The room went quiet, the only sound the hum of the city outside. Hayes finally said, "Or it's another trap. You ever think of that?" James's lips thinned. Every second. Chapter 24. James couldn't stop hearing it. Tick, tick, tick. Not in the air, not in the room, but inside his head. Every time his gaze fell on the photographs spread across his coffee table, the sound pressed deeper, like a metronome buried under his skin. He'd circled the victims again. Red pen, arrows, scribbled notes. Then he'd pulled the files apart, rearranged them, tried to see what the Whisperer wanted him to see. But each time the same question clawed at him. Why me? Why had the Whisperer walked into that interrogation room, not just to taunt the department but to fixate on him personally? Was it chance, or had James been marked from the start? He rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands until his vision blurred. He hadn't slept in 36 hours, but adrenaline kept him upright, pushing him forward. Somewhere in the fog of exhaustion, he felt the shape of the Whisperer's design pressing close, brushing against him like a shadow just out of reach. James stood abruptly and stumbled to his bookshelf. He pulled down old case binders, flipping through pages without focus, until one caught his eye. A cold case from 5 years ago, a victim whose death hadn't matched known patterns at the time, but now the details looked different. A metronome had been found at that scene too, packed away, barely mentioned in the original notes. He slammed the folder on the table, his pulse spiking. This wasn't new. This wasn't just beginning. The Whisperer had been laying foundations long before anyone had given him a name. James sank into his chair, breathing hard, his mind racing faster than his body could handle. His hands trembled against the file. He's been here all along. The thought chilled him. This wasn't a predator who had just emerged from the dark. This was one who had been watching, waiting, circling. And James had walked right into his game without even realizing it. A sharp rap on the door jolted him. "More," Hayes's voice cut through the fog, firm, irritated, alive. "Open the damn door." James hesitated, staring at the files as if letting her in meant letting go of the fragile thread he was pulling. Then, with a curse under his breath, he pushed himself up and unlocked the door. Hayes took one look at him and grimaced. "You're spiraling." James didn't argue. He simply shoved the folder into her hands. "He's been doing this longer than we thought. Years, Hayes, years." She flipped through the file, frowning. This was closed, wrong profile. "It wasn't wrong," James said, voice tight. "We were wrong. He's been freezing time for years, and now he's daring me to catch up." Hayes shut the folder hard. "Then you're not doing it alone. You're running yourself into the ground, and that's exactly what he wants. If he breaks you, the whole case collapses." James swallowed, throat raw, but his eyes stayed locked on hers. "He's not going to break me. He's going to slip, and when he does, I'll be ready." Hayes shook her head, exasperated but determined. "No more, we'll be ready." Chapter 25. Hayes dropped the file back on the coffee table with a thud that sent half of James's scattered notes fluttering to the floor. "You're not thinking straight," she said, arms folded. "You're connecting dots because you're desperate for them to connect." James bristled. "You think this is about desperation? Look at the M.O. Look at the pattern, hell, listen to the symbolism. He leaves time frozen, Hayes. He always leaves time frozen." She shook her head, jaw tight. "You're chasing ghosts. This case nearly gutted you once already, and now you're ready to rewrite the last 5 years of homicide history just to justify your obsession." He leaned forward, eyes sharp, the weight of sleeplessness burning in his voice. "You think I want to see him everywhere? You think I want to find his fingerprints on cases we buried years ago? I don't. But it's there. If you stop protecting the department's narrative long enough to look, you'll see it too. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy as stone. Hayes's expression softened just barely. This isn't about protecting the department, she said, quieter now. This is about protecting you. James froze, caught off guard by the crack in her voice. Hayes never wavered like that. You're burning yourself alive more, she went on. He's inside your head, twisting you around. If you keep pushing like this, if you keep going alone, you're going to end up just another breadcrumb in his trail. James closed his eyes, pressing his fingers against his temples. He wanted to argue, but the truth of her words pressed too close. Still, he couldn't let go. I can't walk away, he whispered. Hayes exhaled slowly, then crouched to pick up the fallen pages. She flipped through one, her brow furrowing. This victim, Alice Kerrigan, you're right. The timing device was in the property log, but never logged as significant. She glanced at him. That's not nothing. James's eyes snapped open. You see it too. Maybe, she said carefully, but one case doesn't rewrite everything. If we're doing this, we're doing it together. No shortcuts, no breaking ranks, you don't move without me. He managed a tired, crooked smile. You sound like you don't trust me. I don't, she shot back, though there was the faintest ghost of a smile tugging at her own lips. For the first time in days, James felt something loosen inside his chest. He wasn't alone in this anymore. Hayes dropped into a chair opposite him, already pulling out her phone. We'll start with Kerrigan. Cross-reference the property logs, interview the original investigators, and see if anything else was buried in the noise. James nodded, the ticking in his head softening just enough to let him think clearly again. The Whisperers game wasn't just his to play anymore. This time, it was theirs. Chapter 26. The precinct's cold case archives smelled of dust, ink, and resignation. Files towered in uneven stacks, manila folders leaning like tired soldiers. The room hummed with the soft whine of fluorescent lights that flickered as if even they were reluctant to illuminate what had been forgotten. James sat hunched over a table, the Kerrigan folder spread wide, property log photocopies layered with his notes. Hayes worked opposite him, laptop open, fingers flying as she combed through the digital case management system. Victim Alice Kerrigan, 26, found in her apartment, cause of death asphyxiation, James recited. His voice was flat, clinical, but every word crawled under his skin. Apartment untouched, no sign of forced entry, no DNA beyond her own, case listed as unresolved. Hayes didn't look up, but you flagged the clock. James tapped a photocopy of the property log with his pen. Item number 34, desk clock, stopped at 3:17 a.m. Original investigator wrote battery failure. No notation about placement, nothing about context. Could have been coincidence. Hayes's tone was skeptical, but she didn't sound convinced. James leaned closer, lowering his voice. The whisper never leaves coincidence. Every object means something. The stopped clock, the way the scene is staged. He broke off, riffling through his notes until he found another sheet. Here, property log from the Fairchild case, 2 years earlier. Another clock stopped at 4:02, same kind of omission in the record. Hayes finally looked up. Her expression wasn't dismissive now, it was wary. That was ruled a suicide, she said slowly. James's jaw tightened. So was Kerrigan, until someone added undetermined in a quiet amendment 6 months later. Both victims young women, both living alone, both found in pristine environments, and both clocks. Silence again. Hayes's fingers hovered over the keyboard, then began typing furiously. Cross-referencing every homicide flagged undetermined in the last decade. Filtering for unexplained timing devices, anything marked as property and dismissed. James watched, his pulse pounding as lines of case files scrolled past on her screen. Names, dates, fragments of forgotten lives. Hayes froze, then turned the laptop so he could see. 4 cases, all dismissed as suicides or accidents, all with clocks or watches logged. Different districts, different lead detectives, but the signature. She stopped, almost reluctant to finish. "It's the Whisperer," James said for her. His voice was barely a whisper itself. Hayes leaned back in her chair, exhaling. "If this is true, he's been at it longer than anyone thought. Longer than you and I have been chasing him." James swallowed hard. The room suddenly felt colder, the air heavier. He thought back to those long nights, the sleepless spirals where he wondered if the case had hollowed him out for nothing. Now, the realization was worse. They hadn't even been playing the whole board. "He's not just ahead of us," James said, staring at the rows of dusty files stacked like forgotten gravestones. "He's been erasing his trail for years." Hayes closed the laptop with a decisive click. "Then it's time we stop letting him write the history. We start pulling on every one of these threads, quietly. If we make noise too soon, he'll know." James nodded, but his hands curled into fists against the table. Quiet didn't come naturally anymore. And somewhere out there, the Whisperer's clock was still ticking. Chapter 27. The retired detective's house sat at the edge of the city, half swallowed by overgrown hedges and the weary lean of time. The porch sagged in the middle, and the doorbell didn't work, so Hayes knocked hard. James stood beside her, restless. His nerves still buzzed from the archive discovery, his mind replaying every missing connection. If Hayes hadn't been there, he might have barged through the door himself. After a long silence, the door creaked open. A man in his late 60s appeared, tall but stooped, with a thinning crop of gray hair and a gaze that carried the weight of decades in homicide. "Detective Rourke?" Hayes asked. He nodded, eyes darting between them. "I don't talk shop anymore," he said gruffly. "This isn't shop," James said before Hayes could answer. His tone was sharper than he intended. "It's about Alice Kerrigan and the others." Rourke's gaze sharpened. He hesitated, then stepped aside. 5 minutes, no more. Inside, the house smelled faintly of tobacco and old wood polish. The living room was cluttered with books, file boxes, and framed commendations gathering dust. Rourke gestured to the couch, then lowered himself into a recliner with a groan. "What do you want?" he asked. James leaned forward. "The Kerrigan file lists you as primary. Same with Fairchild 2 years earlier. Both cases closed unresolved or marked suicide, both with timepieces logged as property." Rourke's jaw worked. For a moment, James thought the old detective might throw them out. Then he sighed and rubbed his temples. "You think I didn't notice?" Rourke muttered. "Of course I noticed. A clock on Kerrigan's desk, battery dead, stopped at 3:17. A watch on Fairchild's nightstand, hands frozen at 4:02. Same staging, same neat little bow tied around nothing. I wrote it up. I filed my suspicions. You know what I got." Hayes asked quietly, "What?" "Stonewalled," Rourke's voice hardened. "Chief said it was coincidence. Coroner signed off suicide. DA didn't want to touch it. They were overworked, short-staffed, and happy to close a file. I pushed back too hard and got reassigned. You know what they told me? Don't see ghosts where there aren't any." James clenched his fists. "So you dropped it." Rourke's eyes flared. "Don't you dare. I chased leads until my captain pulled my badge off the board. Without jurisdiction, without backing, what was I supposed to do? Keep knocking on doors until internal affairs made me their next project." Hayes cut in, her tone conciliatory. "We're not here to blame. We're here because the same signature is surfacing again, the same staging, the same killer." Silence stretched. Rourke stared at them, his face pale. "He's still out there." James nodded once. "And he's escalating." The old detective looked away, his shoulders sagging. When he spoke again, his voice was low, haunted. "I always knew. In my gut, whoever he was meticulous. Too meticulous for suicide, too precise for chance, but I couldn't prove it. And when you've got nothing but instinct, the job eats you alive." He turned back to James, eyes suddenly sharp. "If you're reopening this, don't make my mistake. Don't wait for permission. You chase him, you drag him into the light before the brass decides it's easier to bury it again." James absorbed every word. Something in him hardened, like steel cooling under pressure. "Do you remember anything else?" Hayes asked gently. Rourke thought for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "One thing, Both scenes, I swear I heard something when I walked through the door. Not a voice, more like the echo of one. Like the walls still remembered what he whispered. James felt a chill creep up his spine. Hayes closed her notebook with a snap. "Thank you, detective. That's more than enough." When they left the house, James didn't speak until they were halfway back to the car. His voice was tight, restrained. He let it happen. He let them bury it. Hayes shot him a look. "He got buried with it too, James. You saw it in his eyes. Don't waste anger on him. Save it for the man we're hunting." James said nothing, but as he slid behind the wheel, he knew the ghosts Rourke carried weren't going to be his. Not if he finished this. Chapter 28. The evidence board in the precinct's war room had transformed overnight. Photographs, maps, and photocopied logs sprawled across it in jagged constellations, connected by strands of red yarn. James stood before it, marker in hand, his expression carved from stone. Hayes sat at the conference table, flipping through case notes with a speed that suggested caffeine and fury. "Fairchild," James said, tapping a photo of the young woman's apartment. "Kerrigan." He shifted to another, Alice's lifeless eyes frozen in black and white. 2 years apart, same staging, both clocks stopped. Hayes slid another folder onto the table. "And then you've got Rivera, same story, undetermined cause, desk clock in the inventory." She flipped a page. "And Boone, another young woman, watch stopped at 2:11 a.m. James drew the line on the board, connecting the victims. The string cut across like a wound. "All of them written off, all of them erased," James said, voice low. He stepped back, looking at the growing map. "This isn't 4 cases, it's 1 case, 1 killer. The Whisperer didn't just start with us, he's been perfecting his pattern for a decade." Hayes pushed away from the table, packing. "If he's been working this long, why the shift now? Why escalate to taunting you? Why leave breadcrumbs that we could actually follow?" James uncapped the marker again, circling Kerrigan's photo. His hand trembled with restrained energy. "Because he wants me to see it. He wants me to understand the full scope. He's not just taunting, he's teaching, showing me the chapters I missed." Hayes stopped packing, staring at him. "And where does that end?" James met her eyes. "With him writing the last chapter in blood, unless we beat him to it." The room fell into heavy silence. Only the hum of the fluorescent lights and the scrawl of Hayes's pen filled it. Across the city, another room breathed with secrets. The Whisperer stood in the dim glow of a single desk lamp, his hands poised over the old files spread before him. Clippings, photographs, police reports pilfered from forgotten archives, his trophies of silence. He traced one pale finger over Alice Kerrigan's face. "They've found you, haven't they?" he whispered to her. His voice was intimate, like a lover's murmur. "They've stitched the pieces together." He smiled, though no one could see it, not even the walls. "Good." He turned to another folder, this one empty save for a single sheet of paper. In careful, deliberate script, he wrote, "James Cooper." Then he set the pen down, folding his hands as though in prayer. "They believe they are closing in," he said softly. "But they are only following the path I've drawn for them. Every line leads where I want them to go." He leaned back in his chair, eyes on the ceiling. The faint tick of a metronome filled the silence. Steady, patient, inescapable. "The final chapter belongs to me." Chapter 29. Rain streaked down the windshield like thin knives, blurring the city into silver smears. James gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white. Beside him, Hayes scanned her phone, eyes flicking from the GPS to the printed property record they'd pulled just an hour earlier. "He left this address in the case file deliberately," she said, voice low but urgent. "Deed's old, tax delinquent for years, no utilities, it's a shell." "Which makes it perfect," James muttered. He couldn't tell if his heart was pounding from adrenaline or from the slow realization that every step might be a step into the Whisperer's trap. Hayes looked up from the paper. "We should wait for backup." James's jaw clenched. "If we wait, he'll vanish again." "James." He turned sharply onto a deserted industrial road. the kind of stretch where warehouses hunched like sleeping giants and the streetlights flickered in uneven intervals. The address, an abandoned freight depot, loomed ahead, its windows black, doors chained but not locked. They parked 2 blocks away. James popped the glove compartment, checking his sidearm. Hayes did the same, sliding her badge into her pocket where it wouldn't flash. "You're sure about this?" she asked quietly. "No," James said, "but I'm done waiting for permission." The freight depot loomed larger with each step, the rain a steady hiss on the cracked asphalt. James could feel the air thicken, as though even the night held its breath. Hayes scanned the perimeter with her flashlight, the beam slicing through mist. "Front doors chained but loose. He wants us to come in this way." James crouched, testing the chain. It slipped free easily, too easily. "Breadcrumb," he muttered. They slipped inside. The air was damp and smelled of rust and mold. Broken pallets littered the floor. Far above, rain dripped through holes in the roof, the sound echoing like a slow, irregular heartbeat. James raised his flashlight. "Stay close." "I should be saying that to you," Hayes replied, her voice tight. They advanced down a narrow corridor lined with old lockers. James's light caught on something, a scrap of paper pinned to a locker door with a rusty nail. He stepped closer, pulling it free. It was a photograph of him, taken recently in the precinct parking lot. Hayes's breath caught. "He's been watching you." James turned the photo over. On the back, in neat handwriting, "Clock's ticking." A faint noise echoed deeper in the depot, a metallic clang, then silence. Hayes raised her weapon. "He's here." James felt a surge of cold adrenaline. "Then we end it." They followed the sound through another corridor into a vast loading bay. In the center of the floor stood an antique grandfather clock, its pendulum swinging silently though no tick marked the time. Next to it, a single chair sat facing away from them. Hayes whispered, "James." James took a slow step forward, his gun raised, light trained on the chair. "Hands where I can see them," he barked. No response. He moved closer. Hayes flanked him, circling wide. The chair creaked softly in the draft. James reached out and spun it around. It was empty, only a recorder resting on the seat. He hit the play button. The whisperer's voice filled the bay, low and intimate, sliding under his skin. "Welcome, James. You've followed the trail well, but a hunter must understand the difference between bait and prey." A door slammed somewhere in the dark. The echo bounced like a gunshot. Hayes swung her flashlight toward the noise. "He's moving." James spun, scanning the shadows. "He's driving us deeper," he muttered. And then, faint but distinct, the metronome tick began. From everywhere, from nowhere. Tick, tick, tick. The whisperer was circling them. Chapter 30. The ticking echoed like a second heartbeat in James's skull. Each hollow sound bent the silence, drawing them tighter into the maze of shadows. Hayes motioned with 2 fingers, sweeping left. James took the right, edging toward a rusted catwalk that hung precariously above the loading bay. His flashlight cut through dust and mist, illuminating twisted metal, collapsed crates, and nothing, until a flicker of movement darted across the far wall. "Stop," James barked, his gun snapping toward the shape. A low chuckle answered him, disembodied in the cavernous space. "You sound just like him," the whisperer's voice drifted, calm and taunting. "Rourke, years ago, same desperation, same belief that if you shout loudly enough, the darkness will obey." James's pulse thundered. "Show yourself." The tick of the metronome grew louder, closer, bouncing from hidden speakers. Hayes's light swept upward and froze. On the catwalk above, a silhouette leaned casually against the railing. Tall, lean head tilted as though amused. The whisperer. James felt his breath catch. After years of chasing shadows, here he was. "Drop your weapon," James shouted. The figure only laughed. "You want to see me, James, but seeing is never the same as catching. You know that, don't you?" Hayes raised her gun. "One move and you're done." The whisperer lifted a hand, as though in surrender. But in his other, barely visible, was something small and metallic, a remote. James's got twisted. Hayes, don't. The remote clicked. With a roar, a bank of old floodlights blazed to life, searing their vision. James shielded his eyes, blinking furiously as the silhouette vanished in the glare. Move, Hayes shouted, charging for the stairs to the catwalk. James followed, heart pounding, but when they reached the landing, the metal rattling under their boots, the catwalk was empty. Only a single pocket watch dangled from the railing, its chain swaying. James snatched it, opening the cover. The hands were frozen at 12:01. A new hour, a new chapter. Hayes scanned the shadows below, her breath harsh. He was right there, right there. James slammed the watch shut, fury burning in his chest. He wanted us to see him, to know he's always a step ahead. From the shadows below, faint, mocking, came the last whisper. Tick-tock. Then silence. James stood frozen on the catwalk, the useless watch clenched in his fist, knowing the chase had only just sharpened. Chapter 31. James couldn't stop staring at the watch. Even as Hayes pulled the car out of the depot's lot, her knuckles pale against the wheel, James sat hunched in the passenger seat, the silver case glinting in the dashlight. The hands frozen at 12:01 felt heavier than any bullet. Hayes broke the silence first. We should bag it, get forensics on the chain, the clasp, the mechanism. No, James cut her off, sharper than he meant. He wiped it, like he wipes everything. You think he'd leave prints, sweat, anything. She shot him a hard glance. That's procedure. James turned the watch over in his hand, feeling the faint grooves etched into the casing. Procedure's how he stays ahead. He gave this to me, not the department, me. Hayes's jaw clenched. You're not the only one in this fight, James. He ignored her, prying the back open with his pocket knife. Tiny gears gleamed, still, lifeless, but scratched inside the casing, almost invisible unless the light caught just right, was a mark. Letters. RK. James's breath hitched. Kerrigan. Hayes leaned closer. Her face went pale. You think it's hers. He snapped the watch shut, a surge of bitter clarity racing through him. No, it's his. A reminder, a signature. He's been carrying their names, collecting them. The car hit a pothole, jolting them both. James barely noticed. Every clock, every watch, he said, staring at the frozen hands. It's not just about time, it's about ownership. He stops their time and he keeps a piece of it for himself, like a ledger. Hayes exhaled shakily. Then he's showing you the next page. James nodded. 12:01, a new hour, a new victim. Silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. Hayes turned down a narrow street toward the precinct, but James's voice stopped her. Pull over. James. Now. She pulled into a deserted lot. Rain still streaked the windshield, city lights blurred into dripping gold. James clutched the watch, his eyes wild, burning. I can't sit in that precinct while another body hits the slab. I won't. He's taunting me with a clock, Hayes. That means he's already chosen someone, already staged it. Hayes stared at him, her lips pressed thin. You're spiraling, you know that, right? That's exactly what he wants. James turned to her, the weight of every failure grinding in his eyes. Then I'll use it. If this is a game, I'll play it. Harder, smarter, whatever it takes. Hayes held his gaze for a long moment. Then, reluctantly, she nodded. Fine, we follow the watch, but we do it together. One more step alone and you'll end up just another mark on his ledger. James closed his fist around the watch. The cold metal bit into his skin, sharp and unrelenting. Then we'd better move fast, he said, voice low, because midnight's already passed. Chapter 32. The whisper worked in silence. The depot's shadows had been traded for a loft that smelled of plaster and rot, a forgotten warehouse 3 stories above the river. He moved with calm precision, hands sure, unhurried. The chair was placed dead center on the warped floorboards. A spotlight, jury-rigged from a salvaged lamp, cast a cone of white light like an interrogation room cut out of the darkness. Ropes coiled neat as serpents beside the chair. On the wall, in careful chalk, the outline of a clock face took form, its hands fixed at 12:01. He hummed softly as he worked. Not a tune, not exactly. More like a murmur, the breath of a thought unfinished. He placed the watch, James's watch now on the seat, just there, waiting. A ledger always had its balance. This time he would give them a glimpse of what was owed. The detective thought himself clever, chasing scratches in the casing, seeing patterns where the world offered only inevitability. Good. Let him see. Let him run. The hunt was meaningless if the prey did not struggle. He stepped back, admiring the tableau. A stage set for fear. A clock face scrawled in chalk, a chair with its silent sentinel resting at the center. He could already hear the echo of footsteps, the ragged breath of men too late to stop what had already been written. "Time stops," he whispered. The words were smoke in the empty loft. "And I keep it." James slammed the precinct door open, Hayes on his heels. The watch lay heavy in his palm, that scratch, R.K., burning like a brand in his mind. He slapped it down on the strategy table where a handful of analysts in uniforms looked up in alarm. 12:01 isn't just a time, James snapped, packing. It's a place, or it will be. The chalk line the staging. He's pointing us to his next stage. Hayes planted her hands on the table, her tone firmer. He's escalating. If he wanted James dead, he'd have done it. This is theater. He's building something, and he wants us there to watch it collapse. A map sprawled across the table. James leaned over it, eyes scanning the riverfront. He needs height, isolation, sightlines. He wants control of the approach. His finger stabbed a circle around a string of old warehouses. Here, the lofts, they've been empty for years. Hayes frowned. That's blocks of empty space. He could be in anyone. James clenched his jaw. Then we start now. We sweep them all. We don't wait for backup. If he's already staged it, the clock's ticking. The team exchanged uneasy looks, but Hayes straightened, nodding once. Move out. Split into pairs. James, you're with me. James closed his fist over the watch again. Cold metal, cold truth. For the first time, he thought he could almost hear the whisperer's voice, low and taunting, threading through his own thoughts. Tick, tick, detective. Tick, tick. Chapter 33. Mounting dread. The precinct emptied out in a rush of clipped orders and the scrape of chairs, but James stood still, staring at the map long after the room had cleared. Every black dot Hayes had circled along the riverfront stared back like an open wound. Empty lofts, rotting warehouses, abandoned storage depots, too many places, too many shadows. And somewhere inside them, a man who could hear the city breathe. Hayes reappeared at his shoulder, tugging on a bulletproof vest. You ready? James didn't answer right away. His eyes fixed on the scratched watch in his palm, thumb brushing over the letters. RK, he had turned it over 100 times, and still it felt unfinished, like a riddle missing its last line. Hayes studied him, her voice pitched low. You've been running hot for weeks, James. If you go in with your head spinning like this, he'll eat you alive. James almost laughed, but it came out harsh. He already is. A silence stretched. Hayes tightened her vest straps, then sighed. Don't make this a suicide mission, not now. Out in the motor pool, the tactical team strapped in. Radios hissed. The rhythmic click of slides being racked and checked echoed off the concrete walls. There was no chatter, no nervous jokes, just the grim weight of people who knew what they were walking into. James climbed into the van opposite Hayes. For a long minute the engine idled, the team caught in a frozen moment before the plunge. He caught sight of his own reflection in the van window, hollow eyes, a jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. He didn't recognize himself. Hayes leaned close, voice almost a whisper. He wants you unsteady, that's his play, but you've still got something he doesn't. James didn't look at her. What's that? Me. The convoy rolled through the sleeping city, headlights carving tunnels through mist that clung low over the streets. James felt every bump in the road reverberate through his chest. Somewhere ahead. A loft light glowed against the dark, too bright, too deliberate. In the van's stale air, one of the younger officers muttered, Feels like he's waiting on us. James closed his hand around the watch again, and for an instant swore he could hear it ticking. Not real, not possible, but still there. Tick, tick, tick. The whisper was waiting. The vans braked hard outside the riverfront warehouse, tires crunching over broken glass. The structure loomed in the mist like a rusted carcass, its windows jagged, its steel ribs groaning with the weight of years. Doors slammed, radios hissed to life. Hayes gave the signal and the team fanned out, boots pounding across cracked asphalt, rifles raised. James's pulse hammered in time with the crunch of his steps. He gripped his sidearm tighter than he should. Inside, the air was stale with mold and motor oil. Flashlights cut pale tunnels through the black, their beams catching on chains that swayed from the rafters. Every shadow looked like it might move. Team Alpha, East Stairwell. Hayes's voice cut through the comms, taut and steady. Team Bravo, sweep the basement. Copy. James fell into step beside her, but as they turned into a yawning corridor, a whisper hissed through the comms. James. He froze, static snapped. Hayes whipped her head toward him. What? Did you hear that? His voice was ragged, too loud in the stillness. Hayes shook her head, but her eyes flicked uneasy. Stay sharp. The team spread thinner, voices overlapping on the comms, updates echoing in a chorus that was too loud, too messy. Clear on the south corner. Basement empty so far. Second level, nothing yet. Then metal clanged above them, heavy, deliberate. Everyone froze. Hayes snapped, third floor move. Boots thundered up the stairs, but James felt it in his gut. Too easy, too loud, too staged. On the third floor, the team fanned through a maze of rusted machinery and overturned pallets. Flashlight beams jittered over graffiti-scrawled walls. Then another whisper, this time over the building itself, bouncing off the rafters like the steel had learned to speak. Too slow. The youngest officer spun. Did you hear? A pipe clattered across the concrete, thrown from somewhere unseen. Shots cracked in the dark, echoes ricocheting wildly. Shouts erupted. Hold your fire, hold, Hayes barked. But the panic had already broken their line. James moved fast, separating without thinking. The comms blared overlapping voices, too many directions at once, too much noise. Then at the far end of the floor, a figure flickered in the shadows. Tall, still, waiting. James raised his weapon. Don't move. The figure tilted its head, and then it stepped back, swallowed by black. James ran, breath tearing, Hayes shouting somewhere behind him, but when he rounded the corner, only silence. Only another chain swaying gently, as if someone had brushed past seconds before. The comms erupted again. Officer down in the basement. Trap rigged, he knew we were coming. Hayes's voice cut through the chaos, sharper than glass. Pull back, regroup now. But James stood frozen, staring into the dark where the figure had vanished. His pulse roared in his ears. The whisperer had scattered them, played them, pulled them apart piece by piece. And somewhere in the rafters above, hidden in the broken cathedral of steel, the whisperer was smiling. Chapter 34. The warehouse reeked of gunpowder and sweat as the team stumbled back into the night air. Medics swarmed the injured officer, his vest scorched where a rigged blast had gone off in the basement. Blood smeared the asphalt in a jagged arc. Hayes barked orders, her voice sharp, her face pale under the floodlights. Get him stable. Lock this perimeter, nobody in, nobody out. James stood at the edge of the chaos, the watch cold in his palm, his gun still shaking in his hand. He could feel the whisperer in the marrow of his bones, mocking him, needling him. A van door slammed. The chief of detectives arrived, his tie askew, face thunderous. What the hell was that? Hayes turned to meet him, shoulders squared. A setup, he baited us in. No kidding, the chief snapped, his eyes raking across the scattered officers. One man plays you like violins, and I've got a half-dozen cops rattled, one in the hospital and no suspect in custody. James bristled, the words boiling before he could stop them. It's not just one man, it's a ghost. He's been laying this foundation for years. Enough, the chief's voice cracked like a whip. You're losing control, Detective Moore. You want to keep chasing shadows, fine, but don't drag the whole damn department down with you. The air went silent. Officers shifted uneasily, eyes darting between James and the brass. Hayes stepped in fast, her voice steady but tight. Chief, James isn't wrong. The whisperer's escalating. We pull back now, we lose whatever ground we've scraped together. But the chief was already shaking his head, jaw set. The commissioner wants results, not excuses. From now on, you run everything past me before you move. You hear me, Hayes? Yes, sir, Hayes bit out, though her eyes flashed with quiet fury. And you, Moore? The chief fixed James with a stare that felt like a nail being hammered in. One more misstep and you're off this case, permanently. He turned on his heel, barking at aides, leaving the threat hanging in the damp night air. The convoy back to the precinct was silent. Radios muted, no nervous chatter, just the low hum of engines. James sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Hayes broke the silence at last. You can't keep letting him get under your skin. James gave a hollow laugh. He's already under it. He knows where to poke, knows what to say. He's not just playing games with us, he's writing the damn script. Hayes leaned back, studying him. Then maybe it's time we stop playing by his. James turned to look at her. In her eyes, he didn't see panic or despair, just resolve razor sharp. For the first time that night, he felt the faintest pulse of something else beneath the dread. Not hope exactly, but fight. Back at the precinct, the press had gathered like vultures. Flashes lit the steps as officers tried to shield the wounded. Questions flew, each one a barb. Was this a trap? Is the whisper outsmarting the task force? How many more bodies before you get control? James pushed past the shouting, ignoring the cameras, but the words stuck anyway. Inside, the command room was tense with exhaustion. Maps still spread across the wall, red pins stabbing into the city like open wounds. Hayes stood beside him, silent, waiting. James closed his eyes. The whisperer had slipped the noose again, but James could feel it in his gut. The circle was tightening on both sides. And if they didn't move faster, the whisperer wouldn't just outsmart them. He'd destroy them. Chapter 35. Behind closed doors. The precinct had quieted to a low hum by the time James and Hayes shut themselves into her office. Outside, the night shift shuffled papers, tapped keyboards, tried not to look like they were listening. Inside, the blinds rattled softly against the window, the air heavy with the smell of burnt coffee and sweat. James dropped into the chair opposite her desk, the weight of failure pressing like iron across his shoulders. He hadn't even taken off his vest. His hands still twitched, remembering the pistol grip, the near phantom of the whisperer's silhouette. Hayes locked the door before sitting down. He played us, no point dressing it up. James barked a laugh, sharp, bitter. He didn't just play us. He orchestrated the whole damn thing. He knew how we'd split, how we'd chase. Hell, I think he even knew which one of us would fire first. Hayes leaned forward, elbows on the desk. Her eyes were steady, cutting through his unraveling. Then stop focusing on what we lost and start focusing on what he showed us. James frowned. What do you mean? He's meticulous, precise, but that kind of choreography leaves fingerprints. He doesn't improvise, he plans. That's his strength, but it's also his weakness. James turned that over, jaw working. You think he's sloppy enough to leave breadcrumbs? Hayes gave a small, humorless smile. Not sloppy, just human. Even perfectionists miss a stitch if you pull the thread hard enough. For a moment, the silence hummed between them. James felt the anger in him steady, reshaping into something sharper. Not rage, focus. Then we need to pull harder, he said at last. Hayes nodded. We'll work around the chief. Quietly. No leaks, no sign of what we're digging at. The whisperer's watching the official channels, but he doesn't know what happens in this room. James studied her, a rare flicker of gratitude softening his voice. You're putting your neck out. I already did, Hayes said. Might as well make it worth it. For the first time since the warehouse, James almost smiled. Almost. He pulled the battered watch from his pocket, setting it down on her desk with a soft clink. Then let's start with this. The initials, the timing. Somewhere in his past, this is tied to him. We dig there, we might find the crack. Hayes tapped the watch once, like sealing an oath. All right, Moore, let's see where this thread goes. Outside the office, the precinct lights flickered once, as if the building itself knew a storm was brewing. Chapter 36. The Whisperer's Calm. The city always hummed differently after a hunt. Not louder, not softer, just shifted. A rhythm most people couldn't hear. The Whisperer lay back in his chair, lights dim, a small lamp glowing on the desk where his tools were arranged with the neatness of a surgeon. He let the silence expand, stretching out like a cat in the dark. He could still feel the residue of the warehouse, the thud of boots, the flicker of flashlights, the sharp sting of gunpowder. The echoes clung to him like perfume. They had been close, closer than anyone had before. He respected that. Not feared. Respected. Moore, Hayes. They had moved like people who believed in something, believed in each other. That was rare, dangerous even, because conviction made people unpredictable. The Whisperer tilted his head, eyes tracing the watch that sat on the table before him. He touched it with the tips of his fingers, almost tender. The engraving caught the light, RK a tether to something long buried, yet still breathing beneath the surface of his carefully constructed order. Moore had felt it. He had seen the detective's hand close around it in the shadows. That moment had been a test, and Moore had passed, not because he solved it, but because he obsessed over it. Obsession was a doorway, and once you stepped through, you never came back the same. The Whisperer allowed himself a slow breath, savoring the knowledge. Moore was unraveling, thread by thread. Hayes might hold him together a while, but bonds strained eventually. And when they snapped, when Moore stood alone in the dark, the game would shift decisively. He leaned back, closing his eyes, and let the warehouse play out again in his mind. The panic, the shouting, the gunfire chewing into empty space. They had seen only what he wanted them to see, heard only what he wanted them to hear. Control was the essence of art, and tonight had been a masterpiece of control. Still, a thin line of anticipation tightened in his chest. Moore and Hayes had chosen not to retreat. He could feel it, two hunters tightening their net. Good. He smiled faintly, a crack of white in the half-light. Prey that ran was boring. Prey that circled back, teeth bared, that was worth the chase. The watch gleamed softly. The past hummed against the present, and the Whisperer in his private silence whispered to no one. Let's see how close you're willing to come before you break. Chapter 37. The precinct buzzed with low conversation, but James heard none of it. He sat hunched over his desk, the watch cradled in his palm like something alive, thumb brushing again and again over the initials. RK they burned brighter every time he traced them, as though the letters were a warning carved just for him. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago. The file in front of him lay open but unread, words swimming until they blurred into nothing. Hayes's voice snapped him back. Moore, you've been staring at that thing for 30 minutes. He blinked, lifted his eyes. She was leaning in the doorway of his office, arms crossed, concern buried beneath her usual hard edge. It means something, James muttered. Has to, it's the one piece he didn't hide. Or the one he wants you to chase, Hayes countered, stepping inside. She dropped a new folder onto his desk with a thud. While you've been hypnotized, another body dropped. Midtown, staged, same signature. James's stomach lurched. He shoved the watch into his pocket and flipped open the file. The photographs hit like a gut punch. Same precision, same eerie calm in the arrangement. Another tableau. He closed the folder, pressing his fist against his mouth. Hayes watched him, her tone gentling. You're slipping, James. You're letting him set the tempo, and that's going to get you, or someone else, killed. His jaw tightened. You think I don't know that? You think I don't hear him when it's quiet? He's in my head, Hayes. Always one step ahead, always whispering. And if I don't follow, if I don't understand, we'll never catch him. Hayes dropped into the chair opposite him, leaning forward. You don't need to understand him. You need to stop him. There's a difference. James exhaled hard, scrubbing his face with his hands. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence pressed down like a weight. Then he muttered, almost to himself. He left the watch because he wants me to know him. Hayes didn't flinch. Or he left it because he wants to break you. James met her eyes, his own bloodshot unsteady. Maybe both. Later, as the squad room thinned out, James lingered, the watch still heavy in his pocket. He could feel it tugging at him, pulling threads tighter, dragging him down into a place where the Whisperer waited with open arms. And for the first time, James wasn't sure if he was chasing the killer, or if the killer was drawing him in. Chapter 38. He watched the city from the cracked window of a rented room, the glow of neon reflecting in his eyes. Below, traffic pulsed like veins, lights flickering in an unsteady rhythm. To him, it was music, unpredictable yet inevitable, the sound of a city gasping. James Moore had the watch now. That mattered. More than the tableau, more than the headlines screaming about another suicide. The watch was the stone in the river, the obstruction that redirected every current. Moore couldn't stop touching it, couldn't stop hearing it. The Whisperer smiled faintly, almost tenderly. Moore was unraveling exactly as he'd planned. It wasn't about panic. It wasn't about rage. It was the corrosion of trust, trust in his instincts, trust in the people around him, trust in the very ground beneath his feet. He'd studied men like Moore before. Not just the record in files, but the little human fractures no report could catch. A temper carefully buried under control. The ache of grief not yet mourned. The need, not just to solve, but to save. That was the easiest lever of all. And so the stage was set. Another tableau tonight meticulously arranged, a breadcrumb dropped where Moore couldn't ignore it. But it wasn't the body that mattered. It was what came after. The chase. The narrowing corridors. The questions whispered in the dark where only Moore could hear them. The Whisperer leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the city wash over him. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Confidence was quieter than that. He had already set the tempo, and Moore, poor stubborn Moore, was dancing. Chapter 39. The room was cold, deliberately so. He preferred it that way. Cold preserved the quiet. Cold kept the air sharp enough to slice through distraction. The Whisperer moved with methodical precision, each step measured as though he were conducting a ritual. The victim had been chosen carefully, not random, never random. A man no one would question missing for a day or two, someone whose silence could stretch unnoticed until the scene was discovered. That anonymity was its own kind of stagecraft. The tableau wasn't elaborate this time. No theatrics, no grand flourish. Instead, it was pared back, almost austere. Restraint was the statement. The body slumped forward at a desk, wrists neatly crossed, a pen clutched in one hand. Papers scattered but not chaotic. A note written in trembling script. I couldn't bear the weight anymore. The pen stroke was practiced. He'd guided the hand himself, steadying it until the script looked convincingly desperate. Authenticity, after all, was what separated an artful arrangement from a crude imitation. But the true breadcrumb lay elsewhere. A watch, placed just so on the desk, stopped at the same minute as Moore's. Identical fracture across the glass. Identical leather strap, worn smooth where a thumb had pressed over years of habit. It would draw Moore in like gravity. The Whisperer stepped back, tilting his head. Yes, perfect in its simplicity. Not the body, not the note, the watch. Moore would see it, and once he did, it would be impossible not to chase the meaning. He would wonder how, why, when, and he would spiral deeper. By the time the precinct swept in, the trail would already be stale. But Moore wouldn't care. He'd follow it anyway, because it wasn't evidence anymore. It was personal. The Whisperer pulled on his gloves, leaving the scene as silent as he'd found it. Out in the street, the night air pressed close, carrying the faint wail of a siren blocks away. He walked into the noise without looking back. Hours later, James Cooper stood in the doorway, the stench of a life snuffed out heavy in his lungs. Hayes muttered behind him, swearing under his breath. The room was cold, unnaturally so, and it made James's skin crawl. His gaze went straight to the desk. Not the body, not the note, the watch. His stomach dropped. The glass was fractured, the strap worn smooth, just like his. James took a step closer, pulse pounding in his ears. Hayes said something, he didn't catch it. The world had narrowed to that single object, gleaming faintly in the sterile light. A breadcrumb, left for him. He knew it, and the whisper knew he knew. Chapter 40. James couldn't move. His boots felt cemented to the floor as his eyes clung to the cracked watch. He wanted to look away, to treat it as another detail in another case, but he couldn't. Because this wasn't a detail. This was a taunt, a mirror. "Cooper," Hayes barked from behind him, snapping his latex gloves on with a snap that echoed louder than it should have. "You seeing this note? Reads like all the rest. Another suicide staged like he ran out of rope to climb." James didn't answer. The words blurred into static. He stepped forward, almost against his will, hand hovering inches above the watch. The fracture in the glass was identical. Same diagonal crack, same subtle bend in the casing. His own watch at home carried the same scar, a relic from a fall years ago, one of the few personal objects he had never replaced. This wasn't coincidence. Hayes moved in, his tone softening when he caught sight of James's face. "Hey, what is it?" James swallowed hard, forcing his voice through the knot in his throat. "It's mine, not literally, but it's the same, he knew, he's baiting you." Hayes cut him off sharp. "That's what this is. Don't let him sink his hooks in, you can't." But the hooks were already there. James felt them in the marrow of his bones. Every case, every sleepless night, every whispered taunt, they'd all been building to this. And the whisperer knew exactly where to press until James cracked. James straightened, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. "We take it back, analyze everything, but don't tell the brass about the watch." Hayes's eyes narrowed. "If you're withholding, they'll bury us both, and you know damn well the whisperer is counting on this tearing you apart." James ignored him, bagging the watch himself before the crime techs could sweep in. He needed it close, needed to see it, touch it, turn it over until he could understand why. Later, precinct crisis room. The atmosphere was suffocating. A dozen detectives, brass in their suits, media liaison on edge. The incident board behind them groaned under the weight of photos, reports, red strings crisscrossing like veins. Captain Ruiz slammed a folder shut. "We are getting slaughtered out there. Another body, another so-called suicide, and the press is circling like vultures. We need a narrative, and we need it now." James sat hunched at the table, barely hearing. The watch weighed heavy in his pocket, pressing against his thigh like a ticking bomb. Hayes leaned in, voice pitched low so only James could hear. "You're too quiet. They're going to notice." Ruiz's gaze cut across the room like a scalpel. "More, you were first on scene. Give us something we can sell." James looked up, eyes bloodshot, jaw set. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. He couldn't tell them about the watch, not here, not now. It was his breadcrumb, his alone. "All I can say is this wasn't sloppy," James said finally, voice steady despite the storm inside. "Whoever's behind this knows our playbook. He's not making mistakes. Not yet." Ruiz cursed under her breath. "Then we'd better make him bleed mistakes. Because if we don't, it won't just be your careers on the line. It'll be this whole department." The room murmured, tension a live wire. But James barely heard them. His hand slipped beneath the table, fingers brushing the outline of the watch through his pocket. He felt its weight, its crack, its pull. The whisperer wasn't just leaving breadcrumbs anymore. He was pulling James along a path only the two of them could see. And James, God help him, was already following. The watch lay under dim light, a broken thing gleaming with intent. He ran a gloved finger across the fractured glass, savoring the imperfection. Imperfections told stories. Imperfections made things human. And James Cooper was nothing if not human, fallible, driven, hungry for meaning. The whisperer leaned back in his chair, the dim basement walls closing in like a cocoon. He imagined James's face when he saw the watch. That little twitch around his mouth, the way his eyes would darken. He didn't need cameras to know. He knew James by now. They were dancing partners in a rhythm no one else could hear. He whispered into the silence, voice soft, almost tender. "You'll pick it up, won't you, James? You'll put it in your pocket. Keep it close, because you need it. You need me." His preparations had been meticulous. He had broken the watch just so, down to the angle of the crack. He remembered the story, a case years back, James stumbling, a fall. The whisperer had tucked the detail away like a jewel. Now it glittered again, polished into a lure. He set the watch down carefully, as though it were alive. The basement smelled of oil, dust, and faint mildew, the aroma of secrets left to rot. On the table around him were scraps of his next tableau rope, an old chair, a handwritten note that looked casual but had taken hours to craft. Every element rehearsed, every placement precise. He smiled, though no one was there to see it. James was unraveling. Slowly, beautifully, exactly as planned. The silence between them was shrinking. Soon, the detective would stop asking the right questions and start asking the personal ones. That was the moment he was waiting for. The whisperer closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, as if drawing strength from the idea. He didn't gloat, didn't need to. Confidence was quieter than gloating. Confidence was knowing the game was his to conduct, the rhythm his to set. "Follow the crumbs, James," he murmured into the shadows. "I've left you something you can't resist, and when you take the last step, I'll be there, not as a shadow, not as a whisper, but as the truth you've been chasing." He touched the cracked watch once more, then tucked it into the evidence bag he had faked to look official. The illusion was flawless. James wouldn't know until it was far too late. The whisperer leaned back, listening to the stillness. In it, he could almost hear James's heartbeat, ragged and uneven, carrying him closer to the precipice. And he was waiting at the edge. Chapter 41. The whisperer worked in silence, the way a painter might before unveiling a masterpiece. Every movement deliberate, every choice sharpened to a point. He had no need for theatrics here, no music, no humming, no ritual. The act itself was enough. On the table, his tools lay in perfect order. The rope, the worn chair, a faded photograph of a young boy that would be left just askew enough to raise questions. Next to it, a folded sheet of paper, lined, cheap, as though torn from a school notebook. The handwriting, jagged but careful, carried its own weight, a suicide note that wasn't quite right. He studied it, head tilting slightly. Words mattered. Too neat and it read as fake. Too messy and it was dismissed as nonsense. The balance had to be just so. He smiled faintly when he found the rhythm. But the real breadcrumb wasn't the note. It wasn't the rope. It wasn't the chair. It was the photo. The photograph had nothing to do with the victim. That was the beauty. Its connection ran only through James. Somewhere in an old case file buried in the archives, a similar photo lived. James had seen it once years ago, late at night when no one else noticed. The whisperer remembered. James might not even recall it clearly until the photo was in his hand again, forcing the memory to surface like something dredged from black water. And when it did, James would feel the tug. Another hook sunk deeper. The whisperer set the photo in its place, then circled the tableau, checking angles. From the doorway it looked organic, tragic, believable, but underneath it thrummed with intention. He whispered to the empty room, "This isn't for the brass, not for the papers. It's for you, James, always for you." Finally, he drew a breath, slid the note into the victim's pocket, adjusted the rope one last time. The scene was ready, another breadcrumb on the trail. He switched off the light, and the room fell into darkness. The whisperer didn't look back. He didn't need to. Chapter 42. The first to find the body was a maintenance worker. He'd been unlocking the depot's side entrance at dawn, grumbling about the damp smell that never left the concrete walls. The sight waiting for him inside froze him mid-step. A man slumped forward in the old chair, head bowed, rope around his neck. The dim light cut across his pale face, the note tucked neatly into his pocket. For a moment the worker thought it was a mannequin, some cruel prank. Then the smell hit him, and he stumbled backward, gagging. By the time the call went through dispatch, Half the precinct's morning shift had heard the word suicide whispered over the radios. Another one, another staged tragedy. The scene was cordoned off quickly, crime scene tape fluttering in the weak morning breeze. Patrol cars lined the street, their lights casting garish strobes across the warehouse's cracked facade. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, whispering, as if afraid the man inside could still hear them. A detective from another unit was first to arrive, stepping under the tape with a frown. He wasn't part of Hayes's team, but he'd seen enough of these now to recognize the pattern. Clean setup, just strange enough to itch. He radioed it in. Control, this one's, yeah. It looks like the others. The coroner's van arrived, followed by forensics, their equipment cases clicking against the pavement. Cameras flashed as they documented every angle. The victim's shoes were scuffed, his hands folded too neatly in his lap. Something about the picture felt wrong. Staged. It always did. The detective crouched and spotted the corner of the photograph sticking out from beneath the victim's leg. He slid it carefully into an evidence bag, not even glancing at it before sealing it. He didn't understand the weight of it, not yet. But the breadcrumb was already set in motion. By the time the precinct called Hayes and Cooper, the media had caught wind. Local reporters circled like crows, shoving microphones at anyone who would meet their eyes. Another staged suicide. Another unanswered question. Another reminder that the whisperer still owned the city's fear. And somewhere in the shadows, he was listening. Chapter 43. The call came in while James and Hayes were still in the precinct's strategy room. The air was thick with frustration. Maps littered with pins, timelines scrawled in marker, photos plastered like wallpaper that refused to peel away. A uniformed officer stuck his head through the doorway. Detectives, another one. The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. Hayes muttered a curse under his breath, already rising. James didn't move at first. His hand was still in his pocket, brushing the cracked watch he'd carried like a talisman. He had felt this call coming. Maybe he had even dreamed it the night before. Hayes gave him a look. Let's go now. The drive was a blur. Sirens keened as they carved a path through the morning traffic, the city sliding past in gray streaks. James stared out the window, but saw only shadows in every reflection, shadows that didn't belong. Hayes kept glancing at him. You're wound too tight, Cooper. He's setting the tempo and you're marching to it. I'm following the trail, James shot back. His voice was low, strained. We don't get to choose the tempo. Hayes didn't argue, not because he agreed, but because he knew there was no pulling James back now. The depot loomed ahead, crime scene tape already strung across its broken doors. Floodlights bathed the entrance, cameras flashing as reporters shouted questions from behind barricades. Detectives, is this the whisper again? Is the city safe? Why can't you stop him? James ignored them all, ducking under the tape with Hayes close behind. Inside, the air smelled of dust and something acrid, chemical, sharp. The scene was staged perfectly, just as the others had been. The victim in the chair, rope around his neck, the neat fold of his hands. But James's eyes didn't go to the body. They went to the small evidence bag sitting on a folding table by the crime techs. The photograph. He didn't need to open it to know it was meant for him. His stomach dropped. A memory stirred at the edges, blurred, old, half-buried. A case file long ago, a photo almost the same. Hayes was already moving toward the body, barking orders at the techs. Check the knots. I want every fiber, every angle. But James drifted toward the photograph like it was pulling him. He stared through the plastic, at the faded image of a boy with wide eyes and a half-smile. He knew this face. Not the boy, but the moment. He'd seen this picture before, years back, in the margins of a case that had never sat right. His fingers curled into fists. The whisperer wasn't just leaving breadcrumbs anymore. He was tearing into James's own history, stitching old scars open. Hayes's voice cut across the room. Cooper, you with me? James turned, eyes burning. He's not just baiting us, he's baiting me, and he wants me to follow. Hayes's jaw tightened. Then we don't give him what he wants. But James wasn't sure that was possible anymore. Because deep down, he already knew he would follow. Chapter 44. The depot hummed with the low thrum of voices, radios, and camera shutters. Forensics worked quietly but deliberately, their gloves snapping, their tools clicking against metal cases. Every sound echoed too loudly in the cavernous space. James stood with the evidence bag in hand, the photograph almost burning through the plastic. He couldn't tear his eyes from it. The boy's face seemed to shift the longer he stared, as if memory itself were trying to claw its way forward. Hayes stepped up beside him. "What do you see?" James didn't answer right away. He turned the bag over slowly, careful not to smudge the surface. "It's familiar. Not just familiar, it's personal." Hayes frowned. "Personal how?" "There was a case," James said, voice low, controlled but fraying at the edges. "Early on, suicide, they said. Young man, something about the family photo and the file stuck with me. Same framing, same smile." He exhaled through his nose, sharp, restless. "This isn't coincidence. He wants me to remember it." Hayes shifted his weight, crossing his arms. "You realize what that means. He's got eyes on us. On you. He knows your history, your cases, maybe even what you had for breakfast this morning." James finally tore his gaze from the photo to meet Hayes's eyes. "He's been studying me." Hayes's expression hardened. "Then let him. If he thinks he's inside your head, that's leverage we can flip, but not if you let it eat you alive." James wanted to agree. He wanted to believe this was still a game he could win. But the photograph in his hand said otherwise. It wasn't just bait. It was a scalpel, and the Whisperer knew exactly where to cut. Outside the depot, the media's voices rose into a frenzy, carried on the wind through the broken windows. Inside, James's phone buzzed. A message, no number attached, just 3 words, plain and sharp. "Do you remember?" James's breath caught in his throat. Hayes leaned in. "What is it?" James slipped the phone back into his pocket, jaw set. "Nothing we can chase. Not yet." But the damage was done. His pulse hammered. The Whisperer wasn't just watching, he was listening. Chapter 45. From across the street, high in the shell of a half-collapsed office building, the Whisperer sat perfectly still. His vantage point was flawless, broken glass framing the scene below like a stage. Through a pair of field glasses, he watched the detectives move. James was exactly where he had expected him to be, clutching the photo like a drowning man clings to driftwood. Every gesture betrayed him, the slight twitch of his hand, the way his shoulders hunched protectively around the evidence. The Whisperer didn't smile. Smiling was for amateurs. Instead, he let the satisfaction seep into him quietly, like warmth into cold bones. He whispered to the empty air, barely audible. "Good. Hold it tight, James. Make it yours." When James's phone buzzed and the detective froze, the Whisperer lowered the glasses. He could almost feel the electricity of that moment stretch across the street, a thread binding them tighter. This wasn't just about control. It was about inevitability. The Whisperer wasn't rushing the ending. He was guiding it, breadcrumb by breadcrumb, until James arrived at the only place he could go. And when he did, the Whisperer would be waiting. Always waiting. Chapter 46. The city felt smaller that night. Every street narrowed, every shadow lengthened, every noise sharpened. James drove like a man possessed, Hayes beside him scanning the map on his phone. "The ping came from the East End," Hayes said. "Old warehouses. If he's leaving breadcrumbs, this is the last loaf in the basket." James didn't answer. His grip on the wheel was white-knuckled, the cracked watch heavy on his wrist. He could feel the Whisperer waiting for him. They pulled up to the loading bay of a derelict warehouse. Lights flickered inside, faint, like a dying heartbeat. James was out of the car before Hayes could stop him, gun drawn, breath sharp in the cold night. "James, wait," Hayes hissed, jogging after him. The door was ajar. James pushed inside. The interior was a maze of crates and steel beams, shadows stacked upon shadows. A faint trail of footprints marked the dust, deliberate, like a path laid out for them. James followed without hesitation. Hayes muttered, Damn breadcrumbs, under his breath, sweeping the corners with his weapon. From somewhere deeper in the warehouse, a voice drifted back, low and steady, almost kind. Closer, James, you're almost here. James froze, pulse hammering. Hayes swore under his breath. He's toying with us. But James pressed forward anyway. Chapter 47. The Whisperer stood in the center of the warehouse floor, face half hidden by shadow. Calm, patient, almost serene. James leveled his gun. It's over. The Whisperer tilted his head, studying him. Over, James, we haven't even begun. Hayes stepped into position, weapon raised. Hands where I can see them. The Whisperer obeyed slowly, but his eyes never left James. Do you feel it yet? The line between us? How close you are to stepping over? Shut up, James growled, though the words tasted like ash. Then came the sound, a faint hiss, a click. James spun just as a smoke canister rolled across the floor. White fog exploded upward, swallowing everything. Hayes, James shouted. I've got nothing, visibility 0, Hayes coughed. The Whisperer's voice echoed in the haze, multiplied, everywhere at once. Not tonight, James, not yet. James lunged forward, blind, heart-pounding. He thought he saw a silhouette, fired, but the bullet struck only steel. Sparks danced in the smoke. And then the footsteps were gone. By the time the haze cleared, the warehouse was empty. Chapter 48. James dropped to his knees, coughing, fury burning hotter than the smoke. Hayes kicked the canister aside, his face grim. Damn it, he was right there. James slammed his fist into the concrete. The cracked watch bit into his skin, a reminder of how close they had come. He slipped through my hands. Hayes crouched beside him. We'll get another shot. He can't hide forever. But James shook his head. He knew better. The Whisperer wasn't hiding. He was waiting, always waiting. Across the city, high above in another forgotten building, the Whisperer stood at a window, looking down at the glowing streets. He ran a hand across the glass, whispering softly as if James could hear him across the miles. You'll follow, James. You have to, because now you know it's never over, not until I decide it is. He turned, fading into the darkness. The city lights blinked below. The game was still his. Epilogue. James sat alone in his apartment, the city pressing in from every window. The cracked watch lay on the table before him, its fractured face catching the dim light like a wound that refused to close. He hadn't slept, couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, the smoke came back, the sound of the Whisperer's footsteps fading into nothing. Every nerve in his body still strained for the voice, soft and mocking, echoing through the fog. Hayes had told him to take a day, clear his head, but James couldn't shake the truth gnawing at him. The Whisperer hadn't escaped. He had chosen to leave, to let them live with the taste of failure in their mouths. James picked up the watch and slipped it back on his wrist. It dug into his skin, heavy, almost unbearable, but he welcomed the weight. A promise, a reminder. Through the silence of his apartment, he whispered to the dark. This isn't over, not by a long shot. He stood, stretched the stiffness from his body, and walked into the kitchen. That was when he noticed it. His fridge door was slightly ajar. He froze. He never left it open. On the top shelf, where he kept a half-empty bottle of water, a single folded scrap of paper leaned against the glass. His blood ran cold. He unfolded it with shaking hands. In neat, precise handwriting were 3 words. I like watching. The paper slipped from his grip. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance, swallowed by the night. James stared into the city's glow, knowing the Whisperer was out there, closer than ever. And for the first time, he realized the truth. The hunt wasn't just his. He was being hunted, too. Sparkles, and that's the end of today's thriller. But is it really the end? Eyes. If you enjoyed the ride, don't forget to smash that like button. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from globes showing Europe, Africa. And of course, hit subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of suspense. Your comments keep this story alive. Your likes help more people find it. and your subscription makes sure you're right here when the whisperer returns. Until then, sleep with the lights on, flashlight grinning,